Okay, I'm going to go ahead and call the City Council regular meeting for Tuesday, July 16th, 2019 to order. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Hornish.
Present.
Jason Ritchie. Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Great. We do have a quorum. Councilmember Valderrama, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
Gladly. Please rise and join me in saying our Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 6-0, the agenda is approved. Next, we'll have public comment. This is an opportunity for the public to address the council. 3-minute limit per person, or 5 minutes if representing the official position of a recognized community organization. If you would like to show a video or PowerPoint, it must be submitted or emailed by 5 p.m. the end of business day to the city clerk, Melanie Anderson, at manderson@sammamish.us. Please be aware that council meetings are videotaped and available to the public. First, I have Mary Wichter.
Good evening. My name is Mary Wichter, and I live at 408 208th Avenue Northeast in Sammamish. Most of our city is zoned R4. That's 4 homes per acre. And what would it be if you didn't have to do zoning, but you could build it R6, R8, or R16, or R17? Well, that's actually happening right now. It's happening in the oldest part of our city, known as Englewood neighborhood. This was platted in 1889 as a single-page plat. You can see all these little lots here. They're 25 feet by 100 feet, so each of them is 2,500 square feet each. So we want to look a minute to see how that would look in zoning, and I gave you my email from today and also a spreadsheet that was in the stormwater code where it shows 4 lots in Englewood, 3 lots in Englewood, 2 lots in Englewood, and 1 lot in Englewood, so you can refer to that if you want to see that those are really over R4, over R5, over R8, and R17 or more in zoning. So if you look at zoning, an acre of land is roughly 44,000 square feet. If you want to imagine it, it's about a football field size without one of the end zones. And R4 would be 4 houses within that. So 1 house, which is usually fully vegetated in Englewood, is about 11,000 square feet. Okay? And then if you have 4 lots in Englewood, since they're 2,500 square feet each, they're really only 10,000 square feet. So they're really not even an R4 size, they're a little bit under. So even when you're doing 4 lots, you're still kind of not matching your zoning. But most of the lots in Englewood don't have 4 lots when they build at 3 or less. So I wanted to show you a little demonstration of what that might look like. So R4 would look like this. It's an acre of land with 4 houses. The water bottles are houses. And also if you do a development like a short plat or a major subdivision, the houses are done together. So this is actually represents 2 acres in Englewood. So this would be R4 and R4. And if you wanted to go R8, you'd kind of have to do this. And that looks okay, but that's kind of cheating because they don't happen all at one time. What happens is one builds, and then another builds, and then another builds. You can see we're getting a little shaky on the stability there. And maybe one next door builds, and we've got, well, I've got 2 acres, so it's about like R8, R16 going there. And it isn't really stable, but, oh, I forgot something. Englewood has multiple critical areas, and it also has steep slopes. So when you have steep slopes at 30%, or, excuse me, steep slopes actually begin at 40%. This is the millionaire next door, by the way. you kind of have a stability problem. And then if you put stormwater into the ground, or if you cut all the trees so there's a lot more rain, or if you disturb the soils, we have a lot of problems. So I'm going to tell you that the stormwater code you passed has really good stuff in it, but it doesn't really address the small issues. You can't rezone, doesn't get net density. It needs to have TDRs, native growth protection easements, or something done. So you'll be hearing more about it. I just wanted to demonstrate it for you tonight.
I think we appreciate the visual aids, Mary. Thank you.
But you have to solve the problem.
I have Paul Minier, followed by David Steele.
Hi, I'm Paul Minot. I'm 27239 Northeast 31st Place. I'm actually over in Ames Lake. I just wanted to come out. I don't have anything that entertaining, but I have some observations here, actually. If you can type in your web browser, data.sammamish.gov, you'll find that there's no domain found. And you don't have that problem if you do data.seattle.gov or data.kingcounty.gov. Now, with open data, we see that the citizens are actually spending, like professional data scientists like myself, actually get our hands on this data, publish our results, and I can think of, just off the top of my head, like 3 major issues that I think people care a lot about. Like one, for instance, transportation safety. Had we had more open data available for us on some of the transportation safety issues, we could have fixed some of the problem that we have in 202 where we had the fatal accident this morning. And that's something that you could do with open data. And you could look at the citizen salmon, like you hear the salmon health, the population of the salmon. You know, you can look at the data there. There's all sorts of data that you could imagine having on a portal. Basically, all you need to have an open data portal, there's only a couple things you really need to do. You need to have basically people to curate the data for that you publish on the portal. And I know that King County has open data for arrests around the law enforcement stuff, but if you ask them, then they basically take a couple months and they come back to you and they give you some more data. And basically, I was planning to spend 60 seconds there, but I just want to give a little pitch here for open data and how we could probably help with some of these different things, now, including the development issues that are going on. Like if we could get our hands on data, we could go a long way. Thanks.
Thank you. David Steele, followed by Arthur Goldman.
David Steele, 2203 Sahalee Drive East. And I'm here tonight to comment on the thought that the council is putting into the improvements on Sahalee Way from approximately 25th or potentially 12th up to the border on the north side. Okay. Current estimate for a third lane, I think, is a little disingenuous. There's no third lane. A third lane means another lane where you can actually have traffic. There's no third lane. It's a median. It's a turn lane. So it doesn't do anything except get people a little bit more safely off and on the road. That makes sense to me. That makes total sense. There's no real added capacity to having a third lane. I think the actual numbers that have come out are less than 50 cars are going to be improved by that third lane. Okay. The cost estimate is totally bogus. I've actually spoken to your staff. The estimate does not include any land acquisition costs. It does not include any extraordinary roadbed support, which will definitely be necessary if you end up taking a third lane all the way up, especially to the border. I would assume that you're not planning on doing past 37th, but if you do, you've got an entire roadbed you're going to have to build from 37th to the north border. And that's the portion that fell off the face of the earth and back in '82, if you remember that. Most of you probably don't. The comment about the land acquisition costs and the overall budget, You know, these costs were actually put together about 4 years ago, and I think they added $1 million to it from 54 to 55 million for this particular third lane scenario that goes on there. Last I heard, property values have gone up quite a bit, and I think prices in general have gone up quite a bit. So I think you're going to find that if you really do the engineering and the costing on this plan, you're going to be pushing between 80 and $100 million to do this. And I'll stand by that number. A 4-year number doesn't make any sense to me at all. Okay. Additionally, the changes will not actually accomplish anything of any value. The council has used a contrived volume over capacity calculation, and then you don't even solve the problem. So why would you do that? I don't understand why you would possibly do that instead of doing the safety application. So I'll be very quick, very quick. You can't stop growth. The GMA is here to stay. Your job is to manage the growth and think strategically. Managed growth. We don't want piecemeal growth. We want managed growth. That's your job, and I'm just asking you to do that job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Arthur Goldman, followed by James Eastman.
Arthur Goldman, 4410 231st Place Southeast. I'm here today trying to preserve the 15 to 20 million savings I played a key role in arranging for the city. I am not a flake when it comes to numbers. I worked as a CPA for one of the Big 8 accounting firms. I was active in the Washington Society of CPAs for approximately 2 decades. I ran for 2 terms their financial planning committee and was pivotal in starting their financial literacy campaign in Washington. In addition, I built a business that had over 2.5 billion assets under management, and I have several other financial accomplishments. I believe you get the point that I'm not a novice when it comes to financial statements. Now that I have got your attention and curiosity, let me bring you up to speed. I oppose a community center project saying that the city should focus their efforts and money on infrastructure, safety, parks, and other key city services, and not on building a YMCA. While that is in the past, one item I pressured the city to do was change the language in the draft agreement with the Y to assure profits and reserves stayed in the city of Sammamish where they belong. My expert assured me this facility would generate over 1 to 2 million of profits a year, and that if we didn't keep it in the city, we were making a gift to the YMCA. The Y and the city council said the project would be lucky to break even. So I said, if this was the case, then nobody should be opposed to adding language into the agreement to keep these funds in the city, and everybody agreed, and my recommendation would be done. Fast forward to today, and I am looking at the 2018 financial statements provided by the YMCA to the city. In there, it shows over 1.5 million in excess cash to fund reserves, and if you add back an extremely questionable charge for $250,000 on money that the Y had already raised to build the facility in Sammamish, that number is over 1.7 million alone in 2018, and there are other questionable items. When you add this number over the 10-year term lease, that could easily be in excess of 15 to 20 million, if not larger. Unless the council takes action to keep these monies in a separate reserve controlled by the city, I am confident these amounts may be lost. Let me give you for an example. In the financials, the Y is taking over $1 million of depreciation expense on a facility they don't even own. That alone will cost the city $10 million. This is just not right. It is widely known the city council has been divided on many issues. Here is your opportunity to come together and make a difference for the people you represent. If I was running for a city council seat, which I presently have no interest, I know I would make this my critical issue. It is time to take action to demonstrate financial responsibility and accountability when it comes to protecting the assets of Sammamish. Thank you.
Thank you. James Eastman, followed by Stephanie Rudat Stevens.
James Eastman, 196th Avenue Northeast. Last time I gave public comment, I was hopeful we could hurry and approve the tip. But I actually ended up going to bed, and your guys' meeting continued, and you approved the tip anyways. And here we are today talking about the tip again. So I'm just going to give you, I was going to do top 10 reasons, but I only could think of like 6 because I'm tired. I want to go home on time tonight. So a few things to keep in mind. The tip is required by state law, and you guys already approved it. The tip can be changed at any time. Concurrency can be changed at any time. For about 2 years now, I've been screaming about let's get on with the TMP. I know a few other council members have advocated that. I'm anxious to get on with the TMP to look at how traffic is going to work inside and outside our community and is going to flow as a whole. And I think that'll backfeed some of the changes that'll need to be made to the tip and also to concurrency. I think we're getting our head wrapped around the axle on this $54 million plan to improve Sahalee Way. That made it on the tip, but if you remember back when they had the list of projects to mitigate Sahalee Way, there were other projects that actually would take Sahalee Way and make it pass. One of those was extending Northeast 14th, I believe was a street. Another way was finding a way around the barricade. And I know that we could do that for less than $54 million and get the exact same effect as spending that 54. Also, we're stuck on Sahalee Way, which, I don't know, the V over C I think was 1.1 or 1.2. I don't know whatever number you guys set it at, but I'm down on East Lake Sammamish Parkway. That's at 1.7. That's 50% worse. So let's not get caught up on Sahalee Way. Let's look at the TMP, look at our entire city and how we're going to manage traffic throughout on all streets. We also need to get working with other agencies. Traffic does not end at our city limits. We need to be working with Issaquah and Redmond now and getting our studies going to show how bad of a situation it is here in Sammamish and that we need help from other jurisdictions. That includes Sound Transit. I hear a lot about people saying we need more bus, but I don't think people are going to get on the bus unless the bus is faster for them than driving their car. And for a bus to be faster than them driving their car, they need to have transit-only lanes, especially going to the park and ride. I think that's something we could start working on now. So I advocate getting out on time tonight and getting going on the tip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Rudat Stevens. I live at 2120 Sahalee Drive East. I am not here to talk specifically about TIP, but wanted to talk about Sahalee Way, not potential widening, which is a whole other big conversation, but the safety of Sahalee Way and making sure that as the storm season comes up again in like November, we're really looking at, are we going to have a slide here? Do we have railings up yet? Are our shoulders safe? I'd like to just keep this on your radar, please, while you guys are planning and looking at where money's going for roads and safety. Secondly, because there has been so much talk about buses, I wanted to suggest that we also keep on our radar making bus stops safer, starting with being lit. My oldest is kind of at an age that I would let him explore the area on the bus and get him familiar with public transit. But I don't feel, at least where our bus stops are, the only access for him is on Sahalee Way, and the bus stops there have absolutely no lighting at all, and they're just not safe on either side of the road, so I'd like you to keep that into consideration. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, I have Chief Jeff Clark from Eastside Fire and Rescue.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Happy to be here tonight. I wanted to drop by and just give you 3 quick updates from our last meeting. One that particularly affects Sammamish. First, though, want you to know we started talking about governance, which is a discussion that EFR board members know has been coming. 2 particular models became of interest on Thursday night at our meeting, and that was the public utility model, which is how Cascade Water Alliance is organized, and a governmental nonprofit. So we are going to be researching that farther in September. We will most likely have our attorney at that meeting to answer questions from there to move forward with the governance discussion, which has actually been on hold for the last 3 years. So excited about that. We also had a mutual aid discussion about a strategy level discussion on what to do as it pertains to the city of Snoqualmie and Falls City, which we call the donut hole, and how we respond with them. That item has been referred to the FAC, and we'll be having a couple of FAC meetings over the course of the summer to discuss the details around there. And then thirdly, the item that I wanted to let you know about is that I also requested that the FAC take up staffing the aid unit at Station 81 24 hours a day rather than 12 hours a day, because we've run into a delay with the city of Issaquah and citing the temporary station that is part of this overall plan. So that was supported. We are moving on to the FAC. I'll report back to you once we get that. But if you are interested in that, as I know all of you are, we'll be sure to keep you up to date, and that your FAC representative, which is the deputy mayor, will be attending the meetings, and the next meeting is July 28th, and hopefully we'll have resolution fairly quickly on that. So that's all I've got.
That's great. Wait, but before you run away.
Yes, ma'am.
We should alert all those sitting here too that our fire chief was given an award himself. He was given from ESGR, which is the Employer Support of the Guard and Reserve Award, and he was given the Patriot Award as an employer who is in support of an Eastside Fire and Rescue firefighter who is at Station 71. And he serves our country in the National Guard and has gone quite frequently. And Chief Clark has been very gracious and helpful in that. And so thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Next, I would entertain a motion for approval of the consent calendar.
So moved.
Okay, it's been moved. Deputy Mayor Moran?
I'd like to pull an item from the consent calendar, number 11. Oh, second, and then can I pull?
Thank you.
Second, okay.
Second, now we're good.
Okay, item 11, which is the supplemental agreement, concurrency management on-call transportation services with David Evans and Associates. So I will put that as right before, I guess we'll do it as our next item of business after we get through the proclamations. So all those in favor of the consent calendar as amended, say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the consent calendar as amended is approved. Okay. Our next item of business is a presentation, and Chief Michelle Bennett will present the Police Lifesaver Awards.
Good evening, Council. Good evening, audience. I'm here today to, along with one of my sergeants, Ross Curry, do a presentation about some life-saving calls that a few of our officers went on. I think, well, first of all, I want to say I'm so proud of our officers. They're just amazing individuals, all of them in the city, and we're so lucky to have them. I should be beaming with pride right now because I just reread all their awards. I'm like, oh my gosh, you guys are just amazing. And I don't want to forget that Officer Hemphill's wife is here with 5 of his 6 children. So if he doesn't deserve an award for that off, I don't know who does, yeah. So I'm going to present the awards to First Officer Hemphill, and then MPO Lux, and then Ryan Chandler's award will be presented by his sergeant, Sergeant Ross Curry. So without further ado, Mr. Hemphill, will you come forward? I'm going to talk about you, embarrass you, and have you in front of all the other people. So you can stand right there, just, front and center. Yeah, so you can look at them. Yeah. There you go. So Officer Joseph Hemphill, on 1/27/19 at 01:01 hours, he was working routine patrol when he was called in the city of Sammamish to an AED, which is our automatic defibrillator request, of a 15-year-old who was unresponsive, who had potentially overdosed on narcotics. When Deputy Hemphill arrived, this 15-year-old's friends were unsuccessfully trying to perform CPR on this individual with no response. Deputy Hemphill took over and was able to keep this 15-year-old boy alive until the medics arrived for approximately 5 minutes. Without Deputy Hemphill, this young man would not have survived. He exemplifies everything that the Sammamish Police Department aims to be. He saved the life of a young person, and the family is incredibly grateful for his service, and we are incredibly thankful for his service. So we have for you a certificate and our very brand new minted challenge police coins. Yeah, you keep on clapping. That's right. Your dad is a hero. I told you that earlier. Okay. Next up, we have MPO, Master Police Officer Eric Lux. And I often say, much like many of the other officers in our city, I'd like to clone Eric Lux, but they told me it was illegal. And trying to download all of his award nominations, there were so many to get through, it was hard to find this one. So you create a lot of good paperwork. So yet again, we were working a day of routine and unpredictable patrol when he was called to an AED response for an unresponsive 30-year-old male who had potentially overdosed on opioids. MPO Lux arrived, began CPR on the individual. They continued CPR for approximately 5 minutes until medics were able to stabilize and apply the dose of Narcan. He was able to save this person's life, and upon later contact, this person was extremely grateful and thanked MPO Lux and Officer Hess, who was with him, who's at a different city, for his amazing work in saving his life. So yet again, an example of saving the life of a citizen here in the city of Sammamish. Thank you, Eric.
Okay, Mr. Ryan Chandler, front and center. I'm Ross Curry. I'm a patrol sergeant with Sammamish. I've been here since last September. So, Mr. Chandler, working day shift this January is about 6:30 in the morning. Again, you went to an AED call, which is a dual dispatch with aid. You were pretty close to when the call came out, just rolling around the district. You got there, I think, about 5 minutes before the medics did, and you went into the house with your AED, and you hooked the pads up, and it didn't actually advise a shock, but you took over CPR from the wife, who was very, very upset. And you did CPR until the medics got there, and that patient was successfully transported to the hospital. So you get your certificate and your coin, and that's an excellent example of taking initiative and getting the job done.
I kind of wish I could call every single officer up here to just talk about an example of something they do every single day. We're just trying to make sure that we give notice of just this exemplary work where they get an award commendation. So we will be seeing more of us as we continue to do these, and thank you so much for your support. It means everything. Thanks.
Thank you. Officers, thank you so much. I think anybody that's ever practiced CPR knows how hard it can be, but when you have to do it for 5 minutes, I'm impressed. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, so we will move into that first unfinished business item, which was from consent, item 11. And Deputy Mayor Moran, you pulled this. Did you want to speak to that? Okay. Don't mind us.
Hi. It is. It's adorable. Okay, so this particular item brings me back to an issue I had with the contract with David Evans and Associates with the tip a few weeks ago. And it comes down to the $28K that's left with this plus the $80K that we're allocating is $108,000 for 3 to 4 months. It's an awful lot of money that we're allocating toward having the testing done for concurrency. I'm understanding that we need to have it done, but what I'm saying is that this is a lot. This is equating out to a full-time person for a full-time at 3 months at $250 an hour. I'm just wondering if we aren't better at that point in time of having somebody in-house. And it just is such a huge cost that I just really have to question every time this particular contract comes up that this is just a huge expense. So that's just why I pulled it back, and I'd like to get some comments from council on it.
I don't have any lights on, but I guess my first question would be for staff relative to what the deputy mayor is asking relative to FTE. Does it make sense financially for us to bring that in-house or not?
Sure. Maybe next year.
Okay.
There's no way we can get somebody in place at that short time. I'll turn it back over to staff. Cheryl wrote an email in response to this earlier today. Cheryl, maybe you can share some of your email with it, and then if there's any questions after, I can pick up behind you. But yeah.
Be glad to. Evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, City Council. So I don't know how many of you were able to read my email. It did. I was able to respond around 6 o'clock to the question, but this contract is what we call on an as-needed basis. There's no guarantee that any of the work would be actually sent to DEA. The contract is more than just the traffic concurrency testing work. We also have them certainly keep our traffic model up to date. Sometimes there are developments where we just want to verify some of the numbers that have been given us. For example, Andrew would remember the name of it, but there are some developments that's in the county on the east side of 244th. And so we had DEA do some confirmation modeling for us for what the county was telling us what the impacts would be. The rest, predominantly the rest of the contract capacity, again, this is capacity, is for traffic engineering services. Last year, we actually had a DEA employee in our office. I think it was 3 days a week. I don't remember now because we were short-staffed. That is the case again this year. We are short-staffed in the traffic engineering division, and my staff are getting pretty overloaded. And as a number of you know, that the job market, and certainly for traffic engineers and storm engineers, for other specialty areas as well, but it's so competitive out there. We have not been able to find somebody that's a good fit for us to backfill our traffic engineering position. We have conducted a couple of interviews, so we're hopeful that we will find somebody to fill the current vacancy, but it's been vacant for 6 months. And so my senior traffic engineer has been had to carry 2 FTEs worth of workload. And I know what that's like because I'm doing it right now, and I don't want to burn my staff out anymore. So part of the capacity is to have an actual DEA employee to help us, like I said in my email, respond to traffic complaints. That is by far the biggest complaint that we get in the city, our complaints around traffic. This person is also designing the 2019 Flashing Yellow Arrow project, and that will go to construction later this year, and then helping to review the materials related to private development. So it's not just one person from DEA working. Sometimes we'll have multiple people depending on what activities are going on. But again, this is on an as-needed basis. In regards to bringing the work in-house, like I said, I certainly would definitely love to be able to do that. But like our city manager said, that will take time.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, no, I'm very supportive of the position of the city manager and of Cheryl. It is a specialized field that we're going in, we're trying to bring in. We have a lot of pressure on our city of running the models right now. We need somebody who understands it. The city has approximately a 28% turnover of staff that's taken place in the past. We're now at the last quarter of the year. We have a lot of vacancies. I think this is just putting yet another burden on them at this point in time. I think that if we look at this next year as things are stabilizing here, it would be worth doing. But right now, I think it would be a recipe for another disaster here, and again, being seen as nothing happening in our city here. So I would support pushing this forward and getting this approved. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart?
Yeah, so just to clarify, so to the Deputy Mayor's point, it sounds like we have an open position. So if we were able to fill that position, which you're actively trying to do, but if we did fill that position, then I would assume that the need for these services would be reduced to running the model. Is that correct?
Some.
I mean, there would still be when you needed additional capacity. And then I guess so one, it would reduce it at least some because you would have additional staffing. And then the second part is whenever we run the model, we recuperate those costs, do we not?
We do.
Okay. So it sounds like we kind of need this in the short term because we have an open position that we haven't been able to fill. It sounds like, to your point, it would only be some, so there might be a net new position that you would be looking for, which sounds like something we would have to adjust the budget for the mid-buy, if that's something that that we want to give direction to staff to look at what that would look like. Is that an accurate assessment? Okay, thank you.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I didn't read your email previous to the meeting, so I do appreciate having that better understanding. I still have a big concern with this firm. I think the charging is a lot. So I would like to see, I'm going to vote for this because I don't want to see the pressure on the staff. However, I would like to see in the future, if we're going to be doing this sort of stuff, that we try to get more bids, because I do think that their prices are particularly high.
Did you want to move to adopt this?
I've got a question.
Councilmember Hornish, go ahead.
The one thing I'm kind of asking for Cheryl is there any way of getting, because this is like a 5-year contract or almost 6 years, it looks like, at $425,000. So if you do that, we're roughly spending $70,000 a year average. Is there any way of getting a better, when we start talking about this more, I guess when it gets into budget, it's just a comment, I guess, more than anything else. Can you put together kind of the different work they're doing, and what is the hourly rate that we're paying them to get a better sense, and what is the average run rate, and those type of things? I think that would help us better understand just what they're doing and how much it's costing us with taxpayers' dollars.
So the hourly rate was in the agenda bill at the last meeting. There's an hourly rate for all of the staff that DEA anticipated assisting with whatever services that we were planning to ask them to do. So if you look on the contract, I think it's towards the end of the contract, you'll see the hourly rate.
In last week's, the contract's not attached to this. It's not agreement is.
No, it's not attached to tonight's agenda bill because it's not a new contract. It's just amending the existing contract. But I can send that to you.
I can go back and get it too. But I think given your email now that's saying it's not just concurrency, it would be nice to know how much is concurrency and how much is other, I guess is kind of where I'm trying to get a sense for as far as the workload that they're actually doing.
So to give you an idea for the cost to date of roughly $271,000, about $60,000 has been reimbursed by project applicants. About $117,000 was for support staff. That included, again, the 9-month assignment by the DEA employee that was in our offices. And then, sorry, my glasses. Approximately $94,000 for just either special transportation studies, work on some of our other capital projects, just to confirm a couple of questions. So it's kind of more of again, as needed questions that came up about either our traffic model or a particular project.
Okay, that breakdown is very helpful. Thank you. Okay, that's exactly what I was trying to get to. Thanks.
But again, that the applicant, particularly the applicant costs, it totally depends on what comes through the door and how complex they are.
Okay, if we're going to adopt this, I need someone to move it.
I'll move to adopt.
I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, by a vote of 7-0, the motion passes. So now we'll move to item 19, which is a discussion relative to Southeast 8th Street and the 218th Avenue Southeast Corridor preliminary analysis, preliminary design contract with Pertit. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, councilors. I will turn it back over to staff as they have that information for you.
Good evening again. With me, actually, to my left is Chris Giannini, our Deputy Finance Director, and to my right is Andrew Zagers, our City Engineer. So we are, well, actually, probably just Andrew and me are here available to answer any questions that you might have on the Southeast 8th project. So we don't have a presentation.
So Cheryl, I had asked a couple of questions, and if you emailed me, I apologize. Tuesdays get a little ragged.
Let's see, let me pull it up.
I think my question specific to that was relative to the average daily traffic. And I guess my first question is, what is the current road classification for Southeast 8th and 218th?
So the classification of Southeast 8th between 212th and 218th is a minor arterial. And then from the Southeast 8th to Southeast 4th, that portion of 218th is also a minor arterial. From South 218th to, that turns into 217th to the north of Southeast 4th is still classified as a residential roadway.
So you're changing, because what the agenda bill says, if I'm not mistaken, is that you're changing it to a collector arterial.
That, excuse me, I'm sorry, it is a collector. Yeah, it's not minor, it's a collector.
Okay, that makes more or less, my eyes were bugging out. I was like, wow.
Yes. But the section from north of Southeast 4th to Inglewood, that whole corridor will be looked at to increase it to a collector status, just to kind of connect the dots of all of our arterial network.
So is it currently considered a neighborhood collector or a local? Which classification?
Neighborhood collector is what we would classify that portion of north of Northeast 4th, or Southeast 4th.
Okay, so what is the current or most current average daily traffic volumes you have for that?
So for 2019, and want to note that, of course, Southeast 4th is under construction, so it really affects the ADT. So I've got three numbers. For Southeast 8th, east of 214th, it's 1955.
Okay.
For 218th, south of Southeast 4th, it's 2010.
Okay.
And then 217th, south of Northeast 4th, is 2370.
Sorry,
So
say that last number again.
2,370. And then in the email, we did send the 2018 ADTs for those segments in 2017. So if you'd like me to.
Are they higher in 2018 because of the construction?
They're different because in 2018, 212th was closed for construction. In 2017, 212th was partially closed for emergency repairs. So it does affect how people, where they choose to go.
Sure, okay. I guess the reason I was asking about the current classification of the roadway and if we were changing the classification of the roadway was based on our public works standards and what we're charging the agency with going out and designing, because I didn't want to over-design a roadway that has, 2,000, I mean, you're clearly well within the neighborhood collector still until you hit that 5,000 ADT threshold, and then you start moving into other classifications of roadway. And my concern was what we're designing the road for, and what are we projecting it to be, I guess.
Well, that is actually part of the scope of this study, is to determine mainly if the town center goes in, does it generate enough traffic to warrant the improvement of this roadway? And this is one of the few east-west connectors we have from 228th to eventually get itself down to the Parkway. This study is to look at the numbers that will possibly be generated by the town center, understanding that most of this section is one of the two ways out of the town center, and ultimately determine what the improvements of this roadway would need to be, not only for just traffic, but also pedestrians and bikes.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think the safety component is certainly relevant here, and I think we've all talked about, the safety component as people are walking to and from, say, Big Rock Park. I was driving yesterday, and there was a group of about 6 boys pushing their bikes up 218th, and I was thinking, oh my gosh. So the safety component, I totally understand. I guess my relative concerns were, and if we're doing some modeling to find out what future traffic volumes are, that's great. I just don't want to over-design a roadway, knowing what those look like, and we have a bunch of brand new developments, correct. And I'm not looking to acquire a whole lot of property around and through there, but so.
Neither do we, and that's why we're doing this study. So this is just to develop the scope of what the project would be.
Very good. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, what struck me about this is the lead time from design to construction, which is beyond 6 years. What's the strategic reason for doing design so early? Because from where I play in business, we try to get design closer to construction so that we're better informed by current conditions and other factors. So can you help me understand that long lead time?
The lead time was being moved around as we work with the TIP, and from one year to the next. This project was added to the TIP in response to the development of the town center. It was originally, I believe, in the comp plan as a future growth project for 2035 traffic under our old model. But because of the town center being developed, because of Southeast 4th being constructed, at least getting an idea of what the scope needs to be, so then we can better define what the project would be and put on a future TIP, is why we're doing it now. We don't know if we can actually build this project, or is it even needed right now because of the delays of development in that area, but at least we have a good game plan. And then also, once we have it on the TIP, we can also go for grants. We did get the $4 million grant for Southeast 4th. As we have a better scope and we know what we need to do, it allows us to give a better grant application.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
I'd like to remind the council as well that we voted to not build a trail connecting City Hall and some of our parks because we were going to use these roadways and the sidewalks that don't yet exist on them as the way that people would get to Big Rock Park, Site A and Site B, and we have another park over there as well. The mayor already pointed out that there are, in my opinion, some serious safety concerns along there. I can't tell you how many times I've driven 3 miles an hour to block the road for a woman and her baby stroller so that someone else doesn't mow them down. So I think that it makes sense for us to get the study done, understand what's needed, what we think should be done, and then adjust the construction timeline accordingly. So with that, I'd like to move that we approve this.
I do still have lights on, so.
Second.
Okay, okay. So Deputy Mayor Moran, did you want to speak?
The question that I had on this, and I don't think there's anybody on here who was doubting the doubting these security measures or the safety measures safety measures that are needed, especially anybody who lives in the 212 corridor coming that way, who drives it and knows what it's like to see those kids out in that road that you wonder why their parents let them. But My concern came in when I saw that if we were talking about changing and upping what we call a roadway where there's a lot of homes, what have we done to reach out to that neighborhood before we come back as a city and have any sort of plan on a paper and then be told that we didn't tell them anything? And that was where I was kind of like, have we emailed that community? Have we sent them anything? Have we asked for input? Have we done anything that we could put in with this so that, because if we get anything back in paper, the first thing we're going to get back is, that's our community and you didn't ask us anything.
That is actually part of the scope of this project. There is community outreach, going to the neighborhoods, talking to the HOAs. Also, we do have an open house that we invite all the residents, put mailings in the entire neighborhood. There will also be some door-to-door presence. We have a couple residents we are very familiar with along the corridor that we will be discussing and getting their input. Because again, this is to develop a scope. So we want to have the input of the public and have what their concerns are so we can address them.
Okay, so I don't see any more discussion.
I've got a question, Christy. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to text you, but it's not working. So I want to better understand. I'm looking at the other alternatives considered in their agenda bill. It says we can defer preliminary design until additional engineering allocated and then execute to do the entire design. What if we wait at least 1 year, if not longer, to do this design because we have so many other things that we're dealing with the town center and the questions that are being raised there with our infrastructure and our new concurrency? I'm just trying to figure out where we need to stay focused and what would be the detriment if we wait at least 1 year or 2 years to do this preliminary design. Can staff help me understand that a little bit better?
We're also looking at balancing workloads based on the projects that we have under design, under construction. As we develop the TIP, then we have, we're allocating the resources we have now. And also trying to get all these projects that are related to a certain area that's being focused, that we're ready when we need to be. Especially when we start going at grants, we're focusing on Issaquah Fall City, Issaquah Pine Lake. The more projects we have ready, the more opportunities, the more grant applications we can go to try to better fund and get the dollars that we need.
Well, okay, fair enough, and I appreciate that from your point of view, but speaking as to the motion, I'm going to come back with what the drum I've been beating, that I think we need to stay focused, and we don't have solutions to the problems we're facing, and I'm just not of the opinion that we need to start biting off something else when we don't have solutions to the real issues we're facing right now.
So I have one additional question for staff, and that is relative to, I assume the work that will be done under this scope could be stuck on a shelf and pulled down at any time, so there's not, while there may be some preliminary dollars associated with a project, that the real scope of the work is what the geometry of the road is going to look like and amenities that it might have. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, it is. This is to identify the main issues that we're going to have to address with a project like this.
Okay.
There are 2 creek crossings that we have to address. We have what's the road section going to be? What do we need? Safety improvements. How do we tie to existing developments that are going on out there? We have the ones that have already built along Southeast, or 218th and 217th. The carrier development's going to start construction within a month on Southeast 8th. So just getting to understand, but yes, once we have it defined, we can put it on a shelf and come back to it later.
Okay. Deputy Mayor, did you have something, or is your light just still on? Okay. Councilmember Stewart.
I would just, I like the idea of us starting these types of things, particularly in areas where we know we have serious public safety concerns. So I would say that public safety is always a #1 concern. And I'll give a little shout out to Karen in the audience there. But in all honesty, I mean, there are we have a park there. We're going to be working on another park in that area. We have a third park land. I mean, it may be a while before that opens, but there's a lot of draw in that area, and there are a lot of pedestrians, a lot of bikers along there, and I just think that public safety should always be a #1 concern, and until we do this scope of work and really understand what's needed, we're never going to be able to address those in part or in totality. So I think it's important that we can continue to work towards getting these types of design work done so that we're ready if we need to. And I think there are serious safety issues there that we need to address sooner rather than later. So thank you for bringing this forward.
Okay. And with that, I don't have any more lights on. So all those in favor of the motion, which is to go ahead with this preliminary design contract, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 6-1, we will move forward with this. Okay, our next discussion is on the 2020-2025 Transportation Improvement Plan and the funding options. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, Council. We were asked to bring this back. We picked this particular date to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to staff. Do not believe they have a presentation, but just a quick synopsis, and then we'll turn it back over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. City Manager. We are here again to answer any questions. I think this originally started with real interest and a lot of questions around Sahali. There were questions about some of the other projects on the tip. So again, we are here to answer whatever questions that you may have. Just a couple of things that I wanted to highlight that were in the agenda bill is that as we presented, I think it was a month and a half ago or so, an update on the traffic impact fee study. Want to remind the council that whatever's on the tip directly affects your impact fee amount. I'm not saying, you should keep a high tip, but just so you know the relationship of decisions on your transportation improvement plan with the traffic impact fee. And then secondarily, if there are any changes, from what I understand from our attorney, that if there are any changes to the tip that you have adopted, we will need to go through the public hearing process again to revise it, hold the public hearing, and then we'll send it to the Department of Commerce. So there was a presentation in your packet, but given just the questions that have come up over the last week seem to be focused really more on the costs or the actual projects in the tip.
I have absolutely no lights on. Okay, there we go. Deputy Mayor Moran.
Okay, well, I'm not that way. Okay, well, I wouldn't mind getting out of here early tonight, so I'm going to throw a motion out there. I would, rather than try to get into all the things that we could, I would propose that we have a few things here that we could perhaps ask staff to work on over summer and come back to us in the fall on. And let me go through those one by one. First one being to show the intersections on Sahali that meet the level of standards. It is the motion.
I think she's getting to it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
Well, that's how we roll.
That's how we roll. We're going to do this all at once.
Okay, I got it right.
To show us the intersections on Sahali Way that meet our level of service standards in 2035. That's one. The second would be connect those intersections with the necessary street segments to ensure they work.
Sorry, necessary street segments?
Segments.
When you say work, you mean
To ensure that they work.
We'll get to that in the discussion. That was my question, too.
Number three, recommend the appropriate non-motorized facilities between each intersection. And then run the V over C ratio test segments as long as intersections meet level of service D and E standards. So do them running at E and then do them running at D.
I'm sorry, say that last one again?
So running the ratios, so what would the V or C, what does the V or C look like with intersections being at D and intersections being at E?
And is that current or out in 2035?
And 2035 numbers.
Okay, I think I captured that.
The other part of that would be, so the motion is to, one, if we can have staff work on that over summer, my motion would be that we have them work with that and have them work with Petit, who, in conjunction with getting the information out of the Sahalli Way corridor study that was done in 2015, because there's a lot of really good information in here, along with a lot of the 2035 beginning numbers that probably just need to be updated.
Is this part of the motion? Sorry.
Yes. So working with Petit, who I believe we just did a contract with them, so working with them again, and trying to come up with these answers for us perhaps sometime in early September.
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. I have a quick question for our city attorney, however. Can we direct staff to work with a very particular agency or for Petit, for example, without going out for bid, or?
You can direct the city manager
Yes.
to do this. In this case,
Okay.
since you have just approved the Petit contract.
Okay, okay, I just wanted to be
It's going to fall
sure.
within the scope of the on-call services,
Okay.
I'm thinking.
I'm not really sure what, so the Petit contract is not for Sahalli.
Yeah, it's for Issaquah
They're
Falls
not
City
under
Road.
contract anymore?
Yeah,
For
I was just trying
Sahalli,
to-
that
Yeah.
contract has expired because there's been so much time. So
I was trying to get a read from our city attorney whether we can, the motion has embedded in it a very particular company, and I was just trying to figure out if we can do that.
Yeah, and that was my error. I assumed that the Petit on-call services would cover that, but what I'd suggest instead is perhaps amend the motion to say to work with a city, an engineering company with which the city has a current on-call contract.
Okay. Karen, are you okay with that language?
Well, Petit is the one who's done the study that we're looking at, which is why in particular we looked at them. I know we probably can't call that out, so I guess we've been told not to.
So
However we need to word it,
we could request a quote from Petit to see what it would be to update their study from 2016. And then we can, if it's within the approval amount for the city manager, we can go that route. If it's more, then we'll have to come to council in September with a consent agenda item.
Okay.
Yeah, what he said.
It would cover us on both ends, though, if we say with an engineering company that has an on-call contract currently, and they can go out and see if Petit is covered. So I think we're covered, hopefully, that TEP would cover us either way. Okay. You good with that, Karen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so it has been moved and seconded. Councilmember Ritchie.
Okay. So I think the intent here, and I'm sure Councilmember Deputy Mayor Moran will always correct me, and that's wonderful, that the intention here is to work with a firm that had created a plan for something along Sahalli Way back in 2015. And rather than reinventing the wheel, we thought it made sense, when we met, to take a look at that proposal, update its costs, get an updated view of what it would be now, as well as figuring out what types of changes could be made to it to make it effective, to help our concurrency calculations, our concurrency failure, to help with recognizing that there are essentially two parts of Sahalli Way. You know, the south end that is more focused on safety. I believe Stephanie Rudat mentioned that this evening, really focusing on the safety component of the southern part of Sahalli Way, and then figuring out what could be done in conjunction with King County and in conjunction with WashDOT as potentially to that rotary at the bottom of the hill that could create a second part of this construction at the bottom of the hill, the north end, north of 37th on Sahalli Way. So our goal here, again, not to speak for all, just Karen and I, we had a great meeting. The intent here is to try to not reinvent the wheel, to figure out where this consultant firm, Petit, did its work, how they got there, update it, and then bring it back to us, hopefully, at the first part of September, where we could meet as a council, maybe in 2s and 3s, to try to ask some salient questions, and then put together a plan that we could present
to the community, to the full council for our consideration, rather than hitting the reset button and spending all summer not knowing what to do. We want to try to use this time off for us, and not for you guys, but time away from the council with us giving you all kinds of crazy directions. Something that you could take and maybe with city staff to go with and see what we can come up with so that when we come back in September, maybe there's something there. That's all. And if that's not clear from what, if I'm wrong, please tell me. That's kind of what we were hoping for. And if that's not clear in the motion, please tell us and we'll try to provide more clear direction as a council. Thank you.
So I do have a few clarifying questions. I heard a lot of, tell us how Sahalee will perform in 2035. Is that correct? So you're not focused on the next 6 years. So are these questions related to 2035, not the existing conditions and not the next 6 years? Because
It's both.
okay.
And 2035.
Okay, so how it is today is that it's failing. The corridor is failing. You had a question about which intersections on Sahalee that meet the LOS standards in 2035. So that's a 2035 question, not about not the next 6 years, right? Because the intersections on Sahalee that are failing is in the tip. It is assumed that all the other concurrency intersections are not failing in the next 6 years.
May I address that?
Councilmember Ritchie.
So again, I think the intention here, again, is to try to figure out, we kind of have a pretty good idea of where we are, but if we're going to spend a significant amount of money, we don't want to do a solution that essentially buys us 6 years. If that's all we're doing, okay, we want to go into that eyes open. What is that solution we're going to be able to do with a 6-year tip and the known traffic counts now? And then what will be the impact of that if we don't do a 2035 look as well? That will determine what we're going to do, right? So yes, we have a failure now. Are we going to stick a Band-Aid on it? Are we going to try to do something 2035 looking? And I think the goal here, again, is to try to figure out, we want to go into this looking longer term than just 6 years. That may or may not be salient. We don't know. So we're just asking for as much information as you can give us so that when we make those decisions, we're fully aware 6 years, 15 years.
And that I guess it still is, one of the goals of the TMP was to look out to 2035 and say, here's what's needed to achieve the vision for the transportation network that the council, that you, the council, and the community have told us to date. So it sounds like what you're asking us to do is accelerate that analysis for Sahalee.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Let's see. I believe the second part of the motion had to do with run the model in between the intersections to make sure that each segment, which may or may not be actually between each of the intersections, but that's kind of a technical piece of data, but you want to make sure they work. And so I assume you're talking about they work out to 2035. You want to make sure, okay. And then you've asked, what non-motorized facilities between the intersections? Certainly.
And the thought behind that was, as we were discussing, as you get to, for example, 202 coming up the hill to where you hit that first stoplight at Timberline, you're probably not going to get a whole lot of people that are walking that. So, you might want to keep that in mind when we're thinking about what would we put there for, sidewalks. So it's looking at each segment and what do we see, what do we need, that sort of thing.
Certainly. And I think in the current scope, it is sidewalks on which side? And then the bike lane. And it needs to be contiguous. You don't want, gaps. You don't want to create sidewalk gaps.
So the TIP was priced out to have curb gutter sidewalks, bike lanes on both sides. The original scope by Petite from 25th to the city limits was curb gutter sidewalks on the west side with a widened shoulder on the east side that could accommodate some bikes and then also a safe refuge for pedestrians. There was also considerations in looking at bus stops, bus pullouts, relocation of a couple bus stops that are on what we consider on the wrong side of the intersection, And then, as was public comment earlier, whether we need to do addressing with street lighting, flashing, beacons for crosswalks, and looking at those type of safety features. I would imagine that's kind of part of the scope you wanted in this study as well.
If I can, just for clarity's sake, and again, this is just part of the motion. What we discussed was, to answer your question, up to 37th, not the city boundary.
Okay.
Up to 37th, and that would be it.
That's easily done.
Is that okay? Okay. Thank you.
And then I believe the last part of the motion, you wanted us to evaluate what the resulting volume to capacity ratio would be if we allowed, now I don't know what the intersections are operating at this point, so, please bear with me, but if the intersections are allowed to operate at D or at E.
Can you repeat that,
So in
please?
some cases, I think what I heard on the last part of the motion was to do an analysis of the resulting V over C if the intersections are allowed to drop to either a level of service D or a level of service E by 2035. Is that, did I calculate or hear that right? Okay.
Because it's my understanding that if they are at a level of service D, that's going to give you a particular V over C. And if they're at an E, that also is going to give you a different V over C.
Well, so the intersection level of service is measured by delay, not by V over C. The segments, of course, are measured, level of service is measured by the volume to the capacity. So in some ways, it's apples to oranges because the measure is different.
Okay. Hold on.
Can I?
All right. Okay. No one else has had a chance to talk.
I'm done. Sorry. I'm good.
All right. Thank you. So I have some questions and clarification, if I may, for the deputy mayor. I'm assuming when you're asking these questions relative to the motion that you've given, that you're making the assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that the project is done. The project that, as stated on our current tip, is completed, and we're looking at 2035 to see what the effects are, or, okay.
No.
Okay, she just said yes. Which one is it? Yes or no?
As we're sitting, you're looking at the tip as it is now? No, we're not.
So you're assuming that the project, that it's the status quo in 2035 on Sahalli, as far as intersections. He's nodding his head. It's your motion.
Yes, that's what we looked at today, yes.
Okay, but we already know current state of affairs. So V over C ratio will either stay static if we've hit saturation, or will get worse if you can actually squeeze more cars through there. And the intersections, what is our accepted level of service currently on our intersections on Sahalli? Level of service?
D.
D. Okay, so now we're looking at a D, which is our currently adopted, or lessening the level of service accepted at an E. And we have one failing intersection, is that right? I see there's one outside of the Sahalli project on our tip currently.
Yes, there is only one at 28/223rd.
Okay, and that's a current
The one numbered 9.
level of service failure that
That's
has
correct.
to be rectified within the next 6 years.
That's correct.
Okay. So just so I understand, we have an adopted tip with a project on it. I understand the vision of looking out to 2035. I completely agree with that. I think several of us, when we were midstream in this whole concurrency process, were asking if we could please look out to 2035, and we were said, nope, you can't look out at 2035 because that doesn't have anything to do with the emergency ordinance. And so we were told we couldn't look at the 2035 numbers when adopting this. But my question is if we have staff go and do this, and thank goodness we just did the contract, because you guys are clearly going to need help if this passes, is that you're going to need to work right now on that project that's on our tip. Because as I see it, Issaquah Falls City Road isn't going to make it completed in 6 years. So if we're not working right now on that failure, how confident is staff if we delay you at all? And maybe you can work in tandem so that we're not outside of that 6-year window. But I guess that's my question for staff is, how confident are you that you can get Sahalli done in its currently adopted state on our transportation improvement plan within 6 years.
Started, right now it's planned to pick it up again in 2020. So fortunately, we have some information already,
Right,
so it's
from
not starting
before.
from scratch.
Okay.
If we moved the construction up, that would give us more comfort. Because right now, I should let Andrew speak, but right now the construction, it starts in 2023.
Okay.
And frankly, given the amount of discussion and process that we've done to date on Sahalee, this is an aggressive schedule. However, we will assign all of our staff, we will do whatever it takes to get this done in 6 years.
Okay, I'm looking over the notes here to see if I've covered everything that I had questions on. So the second part of the motion was to maybe I didn't scribble this down right, connect the intersections with necessary street segments to show that they work. Did I get that down right, Karen? And I guess I need to understand how you're defining work. How do they work? I don't understand what that means. Does that mean that the intersections work, the segments work, both works, and based on currently adopted standards, or?
So to answer the question, I think the intent here is to try to figure out how the intersection LOS relates to the segments and the corridor. And what we talked about was creating different weights for each one. For example, along Sahalee Way in the southern end, if you will, of Sahalee Way, we have intersections. We want to apply some additional weight to those if we can, if it makes sense, in an effort to try to increase safety along that road, so that we're recognizing the length of time that it takes for pedestrian or for vehicles, and specifically during rush hour, to make that turn, or those left and right turns, out of those neighborhoods along Sahalee Way. So I think the idea we'd want to try to see would it make more sense to add more intersection LOS weight to our calculation on that road at those intersections, or are we getting the same or similar answer by having it be 50-50? Does that make sense?
Sort of, but what I'll say is, what you're talking about is changing the concurrency model. And as we've discussed quite a few times, that is an option for the council. Change the concurrency model, which could include changing the equation for how you account for your V over C. You could change your V over C without changing your traffic model. You could take Sahalee as the road, not the intersections, but take Sahalee off of your concurrency list. And you could just take it off until we finish the TMP, figure out what we call transportation demand management. The TMP will look at other ways to relieve pressure off of Sahalee. So yes, what you're saying is an option for the council.
Okay.
Now, I can't tell you off the top of my head, if you weight it by 1.3 or 1.7. I mean, we would need to do some analysis.
That's all I think.
Certainly, certainly that's an option for council.
I don't want to be out of turn here, but I think what we're trying to do is to get more information, or to ask you. The motion here is to direct staff, right? That's what we're trying to get to 4 on, or more. That'd be great. But
Councilman Ritchie, sorry, I had the floor. You were answering my question.
Sorry.
I'm not sure I understand. So when he's talking about more weights to intersections, can you help translate, please, if you understand what he's talking about? I know we do weighted averages for the intersection level of service, but when he's saying more weight, I'm not sure. If you understand what he's talking about, if you can help me.
The way that I interpret, and please, I don't want to speak for you, but the way that I interpreted it was that a particular intersection that's really critical, that either there's a lot of congestion at, or it's difficult for drivers to enter onto Sahalee, that particular intersection maybe has more weight in the level of service, so that we can make sure that intersection is fixed sooner.
Okay.
Now, I mean, only sort of kind of imagining how might we adjust our concurrency model to weight to make more certain intersections more important.
Well, so we have this
and prioritize.
We have this layered, concurrency model, right? We have the volume over capacity, and then we have intersections, right? So what we're trying to figure out is along that stretch of Sahalli Way where the intersections are essentially in my opinion, we talked about this, is a significant safety concern of those folks turning out of those neighborhoods where there aren't, lights and traffic management, tools there. What is the queue length? How long does it last? Are we weighing, WEIGH, the amount of failure there or potential failure there enough? If it's failing, and then what would that mean in terms of any other fixes we would do down the road and literally down Sahalli Way? I mean, I think coming away from that meeting day was more just what options, do we know what the impact is of what we're trying to do here on those people coming out of the road? Do we have the information? And so we talked about trying to better understand the intersection LOS as a way to measure it. That's all. It's not we're not trying to change anything yet. I think we're trying to see if a change is called for from a safety perspective based upon that information. That's all. And if that's not clear, tell me. But that was the intent, I think.
Correct. Let me just jump in a little bit if I can, because I'm hearing a lot of things. In regard to Sahalli, we have two projects, 12th to 25th, 25th to 37th. We currently have a initial design study from 25th to 37th that had an option for safety improvements. It addressed up to 2035 traffic on an older model. We currently are in the process of finishing our 2035 model for AM, which we do not have at this time. That is still under development. But from what I'm hearing is coming up with some solutions on the Sahalli that we're proposing on the overall project between the 12th and 25th. If we look at each phase, we have it both, we do have it in the tip for initial design. Looking at the intersections, we know right now 28th is a current concurrency project, 28th and Sahalli, so that we know is failing level service D in 6 years. Initially, we know by 2035, based on the old model, I also know that 36 warrants improvement for a signal. There's also the possibility of 14th and 19th, which is on the other phase. What I'm hearing is, assuming we get these improvements, we improve these signals in the future by 2035, if they're a level service a D, we run the model as if they were a level service D to see what the model does, try to compute a V sub C. If these improvements result in a level service E, we run the model again and determine what the V sub C would be in that instance. And then what I just heard, if we start looking at queue lengths, that's a deeper analysis because that's more than just the one model we have. That's using synchro, using simulations, trying to develop queue lengths. So that's a more in-depth analysis, which I can guarantee we cannot get it done by the end of summer. This is what I'm hearing, and then on these proposals, it's like we're getting a long laundry list of analysis, but the time it takes to do it is getting longer and longer. I don't think we can do it by summer.
Okay, I've quite a few other lights on here. Councilmember Stewart.
I just wanted to ask for clarification. So the mayor made a comment that when we were discussing concurrency, we weren't allowed to talk about 2035, but I recall many discussions where we looked at numbers from 2035. Am I not remembering correctly? Because I thought we had many charts and graphs that looked at, or many charts with data on it that went out to 2035.
No, actually, once we revised our traffic model, based on the 2016 traffic counts, that model is only calibrated to 2016, 17, 20. So thank you, sorry. It's late, I have to count on my fingers once. The current 2035 model is based on the 2012, the previous calibrated model, which is 2012.
Okay.
So
but we did look at 2035 numbers, just not with the current model, correct?
Yes,
we did, but it's kind of, at that point, it's
I mean,
apples
Andrew's
to
shaking his head yes, just so people at home can see.
It's apples to oranges, and I will again, Mayor, please correct me. When you said that we were told just talk about the next 6 years, it was I took that to mean it's in the context of the tip.
Okay, but I mean, we should be, I think if I understand the intent of this motion is that if we're going to look at spending tens of millions of dollars on Sahalli, we really shouldn't be looking at a temporary fix or a Band-Aid, to use Councilmember Ritchie's verbiage. We should be looking at something that's going to fix it longer term. And so I completely support that. I think what I heard you say early on, Cheryl, to try to clarify, that may help clarify this, is that most of what was asked for, if not everything asked for in this motion, is work that you were planning on doing for the TMP, and that maybe we should just ask you to accelerate that work or prioritize that you do that around Sahalli first, and come back with those results. And I don't know if that helps to clarify, or if Deputy Mayor Moran and Councilmember Ritchie would be amenable to that. But I think that's what we're really trying to get at, is that we know we need to do something on the north end of Sahalli. We know we need to do safety fixes. But if we're going to do more, that we want to do something that does more than just fixes it for the next 5 or 6 years. We want to do something that fixes it for the longer term. Is that a fair assessment of what you're looking at? Okay, so thank you.
I would definitely agree on that. My sort of caution is by accelerating Sahalli and not really running the whole 2035 model for the entire city.
Right.
Once we do get to that point, as part of the TMP,
right.
Don't be surprised if we come up with different results.
Right, because the traffic demand modeling, right, where you look at, if we, just as an example, if we could build, I'm going to be really facetious, if we could build 7 lanes on East Lake Sammamish Parkway, that's going to divert a whole lot of traffic off of Sahalli, and so that changes what we would have to do on Sahalli. And that, I think that's what you're getting at, is that until we do a complete TMP for the entire city, and we look at not only what road work we have to do for cars, but we look at the multimodal, we look at transit, we understand what, what kinds of recommendations we may have in terms of additional transit service that may yield better results, better bang for our buck, if you will, that we may get a better or a different result on what recommendations you would have that we would do on Sahalli. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, no, I am supportive of the approach that we're taking, and that when we took this off 2 weeks ago, we had said we wanted to come back to address the issue primarily of Sahalli. Councilmember Ross, I believe you said there was 85% of the amount that we were looking at. That's the big animal to look at. Additionally, as we had heard here, we're not even really looking at 55 million. We've started to look at a lot of costs that were not included. We could easily be talking about a $100 million fix, which is addressing an issue, and I like the use of the word of contrived numbers. It's popular now, given the census issue, that word contrived. So let's look at being a bit smarter at real solutions on how we can address this issue. The study of 2015 was looking at Sahalli with more of an emphasis at that time on the safety, and that council, which included council members Hornish, Malchow, and myself, was ready to approve it, but we were delaying it for the TMP at that time. So the manner that we're looking at accelerating the TMP work to address it, and looking at trying to ground what's being brought to us with an emphasis on safety, I think is a logical way of trying to do it. It would also give us a report and a foundation based on real numbers that have been estimated in the past. So for all those reasons, I am supportive of this. Now I'm trying to understand on the intersections and the VOC discussions. It's my understanding that you're saying let's look at the intersections. If those intersections pass, then those intersections and the level of service that we put in there, which we have heard is the most stringent in the state, those should be given a special emphasis on it, and where there is a disjoint and they're not, where those are working, we try to connect those together, and in those segments, we could look at the V over C. Is that correct? And that's a question to Council Members Ritchie and Moran. Is that my understanding? So we're looking, we have the level of standards of intersections. That's the first part that we had unanimously approved and is seen as the most onerous in the state. So we're asking, look at, no, but I mean, we've heard from several engineers that here, but that being the case, we're recognizing, we're saying, show us the ones that are working and those that aren't. Let's connect those and make sure, and where those have had problems in those segments is where we're going to be looking at addressing the V over C. Is that correct? Okay. All right. That's how,
right. I don't know what he said
that's the
either.
weighting that you're talking about, that how you're going to be weighting more those intersections, which originally, in fact, as I recall, Cheryl, and then we're saying that in some ways it's duplicitous to have the other one. Now you're being caught by the V over C, but you're using it at the right times now, because now the intersection is where it's not. You're connecting, you're looking specifically at those segments with the V over C. And so it's a more judicious use of that V over C is what I'm hearing in that weighting process. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so before we start on round two with people, I want to make sure, Councilmember Hornish, did you have any comments?
Yes, I sure do. I want a couple of questions. Andrew, you said that the current tip that was approved is a sidewalk on both sides. Is that what you said, or did I misunderstand you?
No, that is correct. It's a 3 lanes with curb, gutter, sidewalk, and bike lanes on both sides.
So can you explain to me why on the tip that was included in our agenda for TR05, it says widen to 3 lanes with bike lanes, curb, gutter, and sidewalk one side?
Well, because on the
TR dash below that says sidewalk on one side.
So on 25th, there's already sidewalk on one side, so we would be putting sidewalk on the east side of the roadway.
On
Section of
both
Sahali from
TR05?
Yeah, the 05, which is the section of Sahali from 12th to, well, 25th, the city limits is, whoops. Yeah, no, it was supposed to be sidewalks on both sides. The one side is the one that was carried, is actually from 12th to 25th because there's existing sidewalk already on one side.
So do we even know what we approved on the tip?
Pardon me?
So do we even know what project we approved for the tip then?
The estimate
You're saying it was 2 sidewalks, but it says only 1? I mean, I'm really confused that we get different information at different times.
The estimate that was used for the TR05 actually was for sidewalks on both sides.
Okay, could somebody please update the tip to we can keep that clear then?
They're not.
And actually maybe annotate the TR0 or TR dash blank to say sidewalk on one side with sidewalk on the other side to make it clear. Because remember, 4 years ago, we had different options of sidewalks on both sides, sidewalks on one side, different cost structures. So I really don't even know what was approved on the tip as of this point. I keep hearing a lot of discussion about weighting of the intersection LOS and the V over C LOS. There is no weighting. I mean, it's just a clarification for me to help. This whole motion is so confusing. I just don't. The bottom line is I can't vote for it because it's so unclear. But there is no weighting between intersection and V over C. They're each pass-fail, and they're laid on top of each other. So people need to understand that. The comment that the intersection D and E is the onerous of all, so we only got one other one to go to F. I don't know how that's really onerous. We don't have an amount of failure. Like I said, it's pass or fail. There is no weighting on the intersection. To have this done in 1 month, you're basically asking to redo the whole. I don't know what the end game goal is. Maybe I heard it right now that then we can raise the V over C for some segments after that. I got 2 more major questions. What assumptions are we asking staff to even use to do this 2035 growth? What growth would we ask them to assume, or what would be included in it? I guess you've already done the model before, But you should know, I guess, Cheryl and Andrew, what is assumed in those 2035 growth numbers. Can you clarify that for us real quick?
So the growth would be based on PSRC's estimate for, well, they're working on their 2050 growth estimate numbers. So right now I'm not exactly sure where they are in that stage, but right now they do have adopted 2040 growth numbers for the region. So those are the numbers that we would use.
And what assumptions would we have as to the town center?
We would use what's in the adopted town center plan. That's the only
At
thing
what
we have.
stage? How many?
Pardon me?
How many dwelling units would be built out? Any idea?
I don't recall.
We don't recall right
I'd
now
have
what the
to-
numbers, but it is assuming the full build out of the town center that is in the approved comp plan and the town center plan.
Would it be full build out at 2035?
Correct.
Okay. And then the other major question I have on this motion is, how does this change the tip?
Doesn't.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. We have a tip that staff is supposed to be working on, and now we're asking them to do something else, and they're never going to get this 6-year tip done, to an earlier point. So I think it's a really vague and unclear. Now, having said that, I really like the idea of going out to 2035 and figuring out where we're at and trying to figure out if we need to do something more than what's in the tip currently. But with what we're actually asking staff to do, there's so many questions. I think it's going to be spinning wheels for 6 months to a year again. I'm done.
Okay, Councilmember Ritchie.
Okay, the motion does not change the tip. It's not intended to change the tip. It's intended to ask staff for information. We're trying to direct you to give us additional information along a failing road and to figure out what options we have. Speaking for myself here, I think that what we see here is we have a road that has some serious safety concerns, and we have a tip, 2 projects on the tip here that are designed essentially to do something. Maybe not what we intend. Maybe we want more information to try to figure out what alternatives we could ask to make on the tip to, 8 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. I think the intention here, again, speaking for myself here, is to ask you to provide us with as much information as you can in a relatively short window. And then once that information comes in, we could sit down with you in 2s and 3s, ask some salient questions about what you've come up with. You don't know this because you haven't done that, and I know we're not asking for home runs here. We're trying to figure out how do we get some additional information from you in a relatively short period of time so that when we do want to address this again, we do have some more information. I think the goal here overall is to try to maximize safety and find a balance for what this road can do. Given its 80-plus foot width and the neighborhoods, and then it goes into King County. There's a lot of stuff going on Sahalli Way, and I don't know that one solution fixes everything. So my intention to support this motion is to ask you to try to give us more information so that we can have a more informed discussion, whether it's hopefully 6 weeks, maybe whatever it is, and then we go from there. That's all.
So can I make not a proposal, a suggestion for council to consider? So if you recall, I think it was at the last council meeting, we brought the public outreach plan for the TMP. And as part of that plan, we are going to talk about what suite of projects out to 2035, besides concurrency failures, because they're kind of a special category. What projects do you want the city to undertake out to 2035, whether they're sidewalk gaps all the way to full-blown Sahallis of the world? I've got the schedule here right now. That portion of the public outreach, we plan on wrapping up in October, and then the rest of the fall, we'll work internally to figure out, okay, because we anticipate the input's going to be all over the map. We will have a set of criteria that we will use, and we will bring it to council to vet them. Actually, we did bring it to the council a couple of times, that we're going to use and show it to the community as to what criteria we're going to use to prioritize these projects. By first quarter next year, we are going to be asking the council to put their blessing on this list, because by summer, we need to start the legislative process, because the TMP is going to be, we're planning for it to be the background chapter of the comprehensive plan. And so we will need, you know, a good 4 to 6 months to go through legislative review. So the information that you're asking us for Sahalee, if I could request time until early next year, so that we can actually bring you not only the input by the community, but modeling of the entire city for, you know, certain projects that the community is telling us, absolutely, we want you to do this. And we can then model that result and see, well, what happens to the level of service of our concurrency intersections and roads. And because if the council wants us to do that up front, just Sahalee, we will shift our resources and work on that. But like I said earlier, there will be a different result once we start looking at all the projects that the community and the council want us to build by 2035.
May I respond to that?
You have the floor, sir.
Thanks. So I agree with you. I guess my two questions are, we broke down concurrency versus TMP, right, initially. Concurrency projects versus TMP. A holistic approach, holistic look at the entire city as far as traffic management is concerned. Is that a fair statement?
You know, actually, the concurrency projects are a subset of all of the transportation projects.
I understand.
So that's what I meant.
Okay. So, but I again, speaking for myself here, not for, my fellow council member that was there, I guess I'm focused on, we have a concurrency failure on this road, parking it on here, knowing that we're probably not ever going to do it this way, sticks in my head as something we should address right now. That's my personal motivation for wanting to deal with this and to move it up to the top of the list. I want something on, again, speaking personally here, I want something on the TMP, on the tip, that speaks to actions we are going to take, not just punt it for another 6 years, and then we've taken the traffic into consideration, and more development goes on, and suddenly we're not doing what we said. We're not treating this as a planning document. We're treating it as a, essentially a note just hiding in the back of your binder so you don't have to think about it. I don't need to show my mom and dad that. It's done. It's forgotten about. It's garbage. I didn't know what I don't know. I don't see it's done. This is something we should try to live by, at least from my perspective. And I think by moving it up to the top of the list and asking for, again, I appreciate it's not going to be exact, but I think it's going to be significant. It's going to allow us to decide, or start to decide, what we can do looking out more than just 6 years, looking out 15 years down the road. I appreciate that the numbers may change. I'm hearing that this is a big ask, but it is a critically important road that is a major failure in our city, given our concurrency policy, and we need to figure out if that is the concurrency policy and then the proposed TIP solution, is it reasonable? And if it's not, then we need to do something else. And if it is it reasonable for more than just 6 years? And is it reasonable for 30, up to 15 years down the road? And if we're asking the wrong question, tell me. I'm not trying to create a ton of extra work. We're trying to kind of front load something that's right at the top couple things on our tip here, because it hasn't been addressed a long time, and there was a slide in '82 and all those things. So, and it's a safety issue more than anything else, and that's, people can't turn out of their neighborhoods, and it's only going to get worse, even if we don't do anything else. That's a concern for me, so I'll just put that out. That's my motivation for this. I know that's a big ask, and I appreciate that, so thank you.
So if I can, is it okay if I respond?
Please.
So one of the things that the council directed us to do before they adopted this, which hopefully will address some of your concerns, was to move pick the project back up next year and basically reestablish the scope that's needed. That, along with finishing the analysis that we hope to do under the TMP for all the projects up to 2035, that will inform next year's TIP. Right? So our plan is get your list, the 2035 list, done in time to adopt your next round of TIP. At the same time, we will start the Sahalli analysis, including the SR202 intersection. So thank you for making that change, because then we can actually study the entire corridor holistically, which is always generally preferred. So you get a much better idea of what's going on in the whole corridor. So I know the council will have to wait a bit to hear more detail, to get more information about Sahalli, both in the near term, in the 6 years, and out to the 2035. But we will be working in parallel, again, on the project, and then with the whole 2035 list of capital projects. And then by the time this year, 11 months from now, when you are all ready to adopt another tip, Sahalli, the scope of Sahalli, I anticipate, will probably be different cost estimates. You'll have more engineering information to justify those costs and justify the scope. And to get to kind of what we were prepared to talk about funding sources. Now the funding sources is also going to be part of the TMP, because we don't want to just give you this whole list of projects with no information about, well, here are your options for funding these projects.
Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. I agree with everybody who stated that we need to take a longer look at 2035. But I have two main concerns about the proposal, which in spirit has good intentions, but in practice it is going to probably not serve us well. Number one, by not reviewing all the roads and making isolated judgments on a single corridor or segment, we have a risk of rework. That's number one. Number two is using one trouble spot to update our concurrency process without understanding impacts to our entire road system is also problematic. So for those reasons, I can't support the motion as is.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yes. I think the first point was mentioned by Councilmember Ritchie and others had mentioned last week. I personally and others cannot support putting $55 million to $100 million into a road that does nothing to improve. Well, I guess it does those 32 cars. So let's be technically correct. That would immediately fails and then requires more asphalt and more asphalt to be laid. It's based on the contrived numbers. We've put ourselves into this position. I think the idea that we come back and look at other solutions based on a real study that has been done of 2015 doesn't mean we're going to take the study as is. I think the council will have to look at those sidewalks on both sides, bike lanes and that, and try to look at what makes sense, what reduces the cost, what prioritizes safety issues first and foremost, because we're not getting throughput with the $55 million, which, as we heard, is more likely $100 million. So let's look at a real solution. The $55 million isn't a Band-Aid. It's not even a bad scab on that. So we've got to figure out how we're going to address this. This is an opportunity for us to look realistically, also get the opinions of coming in of the northern neighborhoods, the Timberlake, get the Sahalli people in there. Let's make sure we realize that $100 million for no real solution is not only fiscally irresponsible, as the city manager said, we're not going to get the projects done in our city. So nothing else is going to be able to be funded here if we put $100 million into that road over there. It's fiscally irresponsible. It's environmentally irresponsible, as we heard on that road, if you look at how that went down in the 1980s. And it's morally irresponsible because we're not doing something. This gives us the chance to be able to look. As far as isolated judgments, we've done that. East Lake Sammamish Parkway, we looked at that we could not repair that road. King County told us that when they gave it to us 20 years ago, that this road's a failure 20 years ago, yet most of us in this room bought homes knowing that in our city that were built afterwards. So let's be real, that's the case. Sahalli will go there. Even if we put a roundabout with King County and that, the pressures will come, and it's going down the same path that at some point we will have to be looking at how do we make it safer, because at some point we're going to have to exclude it, whether it's in 10 years or 15 years or 5 years, because it hits that 202, and we're going to make the modifications. This allows us to make real solution opportunities and sit down and be better informed about that, and not just do a knee-jerk reaction of trying to put something down that's so humongously expensive that it'll shut everything else that's being done by our city. So I'm supportive of doing this, coming back in September, seeing what's now available to us from that information. Frankly, I've been asking for 6 months for that study, because the last council had looked at it, and I had asked that we get updated on it, and we can then look and judiciously, with input, be able to address it. Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Yeah, thank you.
Keep them in the queue.
Yes.
Thank you, Cheryl, for your recommendation, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Moran and Councilmember Ritchie. I think we're in a tough spot, right? We've delayed the TMP for a long time. As I understand it, the TMP, the request for proposal for the TMP was approved on January 3rd of 2017. So that's 2.5 years ago. And unfortunately, this council derailed those efforts, and so we don't have a completed TMP, which I think is what we really need to make the best decisions to figure out how we actually move the traffic, right? I mean, that should ultimately be our goal. It shouldn't be about making a calculation work or not work. It should be improving the situation on the ground and helping our citizens get where they need to go as efficiently, effectively, and sustainably as possible. So I really appreciate your recommendation. I guess my question is, given that we need to give you the time to complete the TMP work, to get that outreach done, to understand what it is that the citizens really want, and to allow you to do the analysis to determine, is it that we need a third lane, but it's a transit lane, and we need to go spend money on bus service so we can move the most cars in the most sustainable and efficient way possible, or is it something else completely? Looking at that corridor, right? I mean, we know that, again, we've discussed this. We could build 7 lanes on East Lake Sammamish Parkway and on Sahalli, and people aren't going to get anywhere any faster because they're still going to get stuck when they get to 202. So how do we really look at that whole corridor in terms of moving people more efficiently? We know that there will be impacts from the light rail going in, and if we're looking out to 2035, we can take that into account as well. So given all of that, what is your recommendation, if you have one? And I'm putting you on the spot, so I think it's okay to say I'm not sure, but if you have one, what is your recommendation on what we should really do right now in terms of, we do have this project on the tip that, at least, I can speak for myself, that I don't believe in. I don't believe that we should spend $50 whatever million it is to add a center turn lane and medians. I do think, as I discussed when we were talking about the tip originally, we need to figure out safety, right? And we need to look at it, and if building out Sahalli is going to be 6 years out, are there safety things we can do right away? I mean, we shouldn't leave those safety concerns unaddressed. So do you have a recommendation of what we should, should we be making any adjustments to the current tip in any way, or are there things we should be doing right now while we wait for that analysis to be complete? Because I think, not to put words in their mouth, but I think that's the intent of Deputy Mayor Moran and Councilmember Ritchie, is that, we shouldn't really be putting a project on there that is going to cost a lot of money and isn't really going to help anybody. It's not going to help a single car get to work any faster unless, you work in a neighborhood that you can take a right turn off of Sahalli in, right? So we shouldn't be spending taxpayer dollars to do that, just to make a calculation work. And I know, I know you're taking a deep breath. I know we've put you in this position by delaying the TMP from getting completed. So for that, I apologize.
So all of us I'll speak for all of the staff. We want to implement projects that will make a difference. Whether they are for safety, for storm, for whatever. I'll speak for Public Works in particular. I've been in Public Works for a long, long, long time. And there's just a passion to provide services that matter, that either matter to your existing citizens or future, or both. You know, ideally it would be for both. When there are, and we all know that there are a number of things we do because it's imposed on us, regulations, for example, from the federal government all the way down to actually the local level, which is where we're at right now. The standards that the council has adopted for concurrency requires this Sahalee project. You know, as we do the design, it'll probably change a little bit, but at the planning level, this project is needed to meet the standards that the council has decided is appropriate for this city's transportation network to determine whether it is operating efficiently or not. It doesn't matter what I think. My job, my staff's job, is to provide data, provide information for the council to make decisions, and then we execute. This project, it meets the minimum requirements for concurrency. Personally, I don't think that this is what we should build. I have not been able, because of some very, critical questions that the council asked us, that we've had to set the whole TMP aside to be able to give the council data and information, and for us to analyze the concurrency questions. But now that that's settled, right now, my thoughts are that we do need to do some more preliminary engineering for Sahalee to really get our arms around it. If we could go ahead and execute the 2020 plan the way it is now, allow us to finish the TMP, we will come back. And between now and first quarter next year, we will be working with the council and again with our community about what suite of projects make the most sense. So by first quarter next year, you'll get the list of projects. You can then modify your TIP without spending more than what we've identified for your 2020 work plan. That you still have time to adjust, and if it ends up being a $56 or $100 million project for Sahalee, which I hope it's not, but if it is, in the intervening time between now and when we bring ultimately the final list out to 2035, we will have Chris back multiple times to talk about what your funding options are. So my thoughts are, allow us to execute your 2020 TIP, knowing that you will get much more information first quarter next year to figure out what do you want on your 2021 to 2026 TIP, and actually out to 2035.
I really appreciate that. So I guess where I'm stuck then is we have this on the TIP because we had to approve a TIP so we didn't lose our grant money and jeopardize our city, and so we really needed to do that. But we do have this project on there that that I think even you have said, and I really appreciate your candor and your professional judgment, that this isn't the project we should be doing, right? I mean, this is a lot of money for not a lot of change on the ground. There are things that we absolutely need to do, and no one is saying we shouldn't. I for one, got on the council because I wanted to see us build out the infrastructure. I just want to see us do it in the best way possible, and this isn't what I believe. So do we just leave this project on the TIP? That feels wrong on some level, leaving this project there when we know that that's in fact not what we're going to do. And if we want to alter it, I guess I'm unclear. I still feel like we had this discussion the night we talked about the TIP. I still feel like the right thing to do is to figure out, are there some temporary safety fixes that we can do in the very short term while we figure out the TMP and the longer term, because assuming, right, that you come back first quarter of next year, you're going to come back with a completed TMP, you have a list of projects. That list of projects likely will include some set of projects for Sahalli. Those would then have to go through design, right? You'd have to go do the studies and do the design. So it would still be, 5 years before they would be, implemented. And so given that, right, I mean, doing all of that, there may be some things we can do in the interim to improve the safety, particularly for those neighborhoods who need to get out onto Sahalli when it's not the rush hour, right? I mean, I think during the peak hours, it's not so hard to get out. I think it's when it's not the peak hour. I've been spending a lot of time in the Crest helping a friend with their new puppy, and making a left turn out of the Crest when it's not a peak hour is taking your life into your own hands. People are flying on Sahalli, and you don't have a lot of line of sight there. So I can appreciate that there are things. I think we have heard from people about buses. I think even former Mayor Don Jaron has brought up the point that if we want more people to take the buses, we need to give them places to stand. We don't have sidewalks, and we don't have bus shelters and things like that. So I think there may be some things that we can do in the shorter term, but it does still feel like you need some time to figure that out. So I guess I'm a little bit torn, because I see the intent of Deputy Mayor Moran and Councilmember Ritchie to try to help us get there, to figure out what that short-term work is while we complete the TMP. And it's just unfortunate that we don't have that data already, but here's where we are. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor Moran and then Councilmember Hornish.
A lot of the information that people are asking for, as far as design and safety, and a lot of the questions that people have brought up are all in this study. Then I'll make sure everybody gets a copy of this thing, because I haven't had a chance to read all the way through it, but it's pretty good from what I've seen, which is why we're excited to see it today. Sahalli is one of those things where it's not only that it's come up and we've got it on the tip, and should we fund it or should we take it off? It's the fact that it has shown up on the tip, and as soon as it goes into the model has shown it as being completed numerous times. So each time as it goes into that model, the model shows it as being complete and permits are let. So it's not that we get to gain, we're going to spend $52 million and all we're going to gain is 32 trips. My concern is we would spend $52 million and all we have left is 32 trips. Because we have sat there and put it into the model so much that we've used up everything. So we need to come to some sort of thought process on Sahalli. Taking it out to the public for them to tell us, we know Sahalli needs to get done. We don't need to wait for the public to tell us that. That's our job. So I suggest that we go back, and if we want to take out some of the stuff that we're asking for, but really this was to look at and try to get us to look at numbers and look at the study and see what we could come up with as safety features, bringing down that big price tag, because that's the big elephant in the room. And what does Sahalli need? What should it have as safety features? What are the numbers now? What is it in 6 years? What is it in 2035? And not waiting a year to get that far. That was what the thought process was with this motion, and we can phrase it however we'd like. But that was what we were, that's the only thing we were really after. We're not looking to change anything. We're not looking to change V over C or any of the horrible things people are thinking. It had nothing to do with that. It had to do with getting all the information that we needed to make that road as safe as possible, to move as many cars as we could as possible, with as safe as possible, with keeping it as how we want it to look in the city. Because the last thing that we want to do is start adding a bunch of buses and a whole bunch of commuters to try to get to a train or even to fix 202, and we haven't had the safety features put in place. That, to me, would be just a mistake on top of another mistake. And now I'll get off my soapbox.
Councilmember Hornish.
All right. I also agree that TR-05 on our tip and TR blank new is not what we should be doing. And I have heard that now from Councilmember Ritchie, Councilmember Valderrama, Councilmember Stewart, and Councilmember Moran. So we have 5 of us that say this is the wrong project on this tip. If we leave it on there with 5 of us feeling that way, I think I'm going to use the F word, it's fraud on our constituents. We're saying, yeah, we have a project, but we're not really going to do that, so really pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. It's not real. And it's not real if we all feel that same way. So I move that we remove TR-05 and TR blank new from the current adopted tip until we can come up with a Sahalli project that we can support in reality.
Councilmember Hornish, I think I need you to rephrase that as an amendment to the motion because there's a motion on the floor.
I'm sorry, yes, an amendment, because if we're going to do this study that's on the floor and nobody supported of the current project on the tip, then I think we need to remove it to do the project that's being moved. So it is an amendment to the motion.
Okay, I need legal clarification because we have an existing failure, and so it is a legal obligation to have that on the tip, is it not?
Well, that's a question for another day, but I mean, in another room. But procedurally, if that comes off the tip, that would be an amendment to the tip, and the tip can only be amended after a public hearing. So the motion could be directing at some point to set a public hearing and to consider an amendment to the tip, but the statute on the tip is crystal clear. Amend it at any time you want, but only after a public hearing.
So
and I so move to amend my amendment to include a public hearing in that regard.
There's no second.
Not yet. There's on a second.
Can I ask for clarification? Because I'm a little confused. Sorry. On the. Oh.
Yeah, we have no discussion. If you want to second the motion, then you can ask for clarification.
Yes, you can do that.
And
if
you
want
can
to.
vote against it if you second it?
Yes.
I know
Yeah,
you
the
just
motion
can't
and
vote
second
against
is
it if
only
you
to
make the
get it
motion.
so for discussion.
All right, I will second it so I can ask clarifying questions.
Councilmember Ross has the floor. He's got his light on.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Well, Councilmember Hornish is keeping score, so I'm not a big fan of the project on Sahalli as well. But with that said, and the motion on the floor is to remove that project from the tip, doesn't that force us to do one of several things? Modify our concurrency process, VOC? Does it require us to put a different sufficient
Are we talking
project?
about the amendment now, right? Just
No, but I'm just clarifying.
he is.
That amendment, doesn't that have the ripple effect of forcing another action to make us compliant within our tip?
No.
I think, yeah, so I.
Can staff answer?
To stay in compliance with the GMA, yes. Something else needs to change.
Councilmember,
Did you want to go ahead?
I guess the way I look at it right now, call it a placeholder, if you will, but we give us sufficient time, next several months, to do the right thing methodically, evaluate the road system, and yes, the TMP. Now's the time to be methodical and quit injecting little changes, side tours. I think we can help ourselves and the staff in that effort, and I think we can work together and get there faster that way, because I'm afraid that if we try to go down this single approach to Sahalli, we may spin our wheels for 3 months trying to reach agreement, which would be better time spent looking at the whole road system, the TMP, getting public input, and making the right decisions. So that's where I feel on this.
Councilmember Stewart.
Okay, so this amendment would be to at a date in the future to have a public hearing to remove this project. But what I'm hearing is that we have an obligation that we couldn't really just remove it. We would have to replace it with something else that would address the concurrency failure that was created when we implemented the new concurrency model. So something would have to be done at that time to alleviate that failure some way. And so, okay.
Well,
I have a whole series of other questions, but they're really more from inside my head, sorry.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Okay, so with all due respect to Councilmember Hornish, I agree that this is probably, well, take out the probably. I don't think this is the final derivation of what the Sahalli project will be. The purpose of the original motion, or the underlying motion, is to try to drill down and figure out what it is we want to get out of TR 6, then TR blank, whatever the number 70, whatever. Thank you. You know, the two parts of the Sahalli on our tip. You know, I think that I don't want to say there's consensus on anything on this council, but it appears that there's, based on what you said, Tom, that there's a certain number of us that are in agreement that what's on there is probably not going to be what we end up doing. There is a benefit to keeping it on 78 and 73. Thank you. To try to keep them on the tip, because that then gives us options. By having it on the tip as our planning document, which I think is what we're still using our tip for, we are trying to make sure that it's staying on there. We're recognizing it as a failure. We're in compliance with the Growth Management Act, and we are, again, speaking, I don't want to speak for Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Moran here, but I think the goal here of the underlying motion is to recognize that the current stated goal does not necessarily reflect what we're trying to do as it relates to the actual words on the tip. The tip does not translate into what we're actually going to end up doing. So for me, taking it off the tip entirely creates an entirely brand new set of issues and problems that I don't think would be a good idea for us to go down. Leaving it on the tip doesn't hurt us, doesn't do anything wrong. It's a recognition that it is a problem, and that by hopefully supporting this motion, we can direct staff to recognize that that is, in my mind at least, the most important road failure and safety concern that we have in this city, recognizing the potential of the town center and the traffic and the Marymore Park and the Marymore Light Rail Station. That's going to get used a lot more in the next 10 or 15 years. What are we going to do? Are we just going to add a third lane, and whether it's 50 million, 100 million, whatever the number is, what are we going to do and what makes sense, and how do we protect the homes and neighborhoods and pedestrians on that road in a well thought out way? Again, the intention of the underlying motion is to try to ask some more salient questions as we've had a chance to review this after it was placed on the tip. The tip's been passed. It's a planning document. We're trying to actually turn that into an actionable item rather than just a park it, forget about it, and never do it kind of thing, which apparently has been what we've done in this council for a number of years. And I mean, again, the goal here is to actually do something. And if this is, it's not an intention to make it worse or make it less. It's trying to figure out what it is we can actually do. And that's the intention, as far as I'm concerned, about asking staff to try to ask these questions and get more information. If it takes a little bit longer, I would rather take longer and do the right thing rather than just leaving it sitting on there and doing nothing. So, or even taking it off. I don't know necessarily what that does. And I recognize you're coming from a good place. I'm not questioning the motives. I'm just supportive of leaving it on there and moving forward with this motion. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I address?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
And I agree with Councilmember Ritchie. I think this is the wrong project. I think it needs to be looked at, and that's why I want to remove it or have a hearing to consider removing it. And I think during that same time period, we can then better understand what it would actually mean and get a better legal analysis and opinion as to if we were to remove it, what's the repercussions from that. Because I'm just kind of thinking that just because we have a tip, and it's just that we don't have the funding to be able to meet. And I think the GMA obliges you that if you don't have the funding to do what you want to do, you know, there's things that can be done like land reassessment. and that we can look at. If we keep punting this project down the road and say, well, this is the project we have on our tip to fill a square, but it is disingenuous, and everybody's admitted that here tonight. This is not the project we're going to do. We'll never get it done in 6 years, and we'll never be able to meet concurrency, and we'll never be able to get actual growth again in the city if we just say this isn't the project we're going to do until we get it straight, and we got to get it straight. So I think we're all kind of in the same mindset that we've got to figure this out, but to leave it on just really seems disingenuous.
Okay, I'm going to get my questions and or thoughts out here. And I'll admit, my brain's kind of spinning at this point between the original motion and all the questions I had there that I didn't get to ask before the amendment then came. And now I'm having to shift gears in my head. And I suppose that the amendment that's currently on the floor of removal of Sahalli maybe buys time for our council to think. But I don't know that buying time to think about a project under the guise of a public hearing is necessarily what we should be doing. I think we're all in agreement that the project as slated is probably not what needs to be built, but I want to bifurcate the conversation here because there's two conversations that are going on or have transpired with this council. One is safety related and the fact that this road, and it hasn't been mentioned, it's in a rural standard. There are no curbs, there's no gutter, there's no sidewalk, there's no bike lane. And it is our only principal arterial on the north end of the plateau. We're doing a whole slew of amenities to our southern principal arterial with Issaquah Falls City Road. We can't keep ignoring the north end of the plateau from a safety perspective. So there's the safety component of this project, and then there's the concurrency component of this project, and we've intertwined the two, and we're having a hard time separating them out. We had talked about before, and it was Deputy Mayor Moran that kind of brought forward the idea of, you know, what does this project look like? Somebody said a third lane doesn't get you anything. Well, it does, because there's a safety component related to having turn lanes and having vehicles move out of the through lane so that they can have an opportunity to turn left without stopping all your traffic. That helps your level of service at intersections. So it does buy us something. And so my question for staff, and this was back on the main motion really, was, you know, I was in looking at our public works standards, which is part of the reason I asked for a copy of the new ones. The study that the deputy mayor quoted, which, you know, the rest of us haven't had an opportunity to look at, but I know she's going to provide that to us. But I do want to make note that that study was done under the interim public works standards and not our currently adopted public works standards. But is there an opportunity inside of our public works standards to alter them so that when we look at Sahalli strictly from a safety, through the safety lens, not the concurrency lens, because these are two different things, right? That allows us to, you know, we need, concurrency allows us to look at it from asphalt only, where the public works standards would look at it slightly differently. So I think the question is are the public works standards somehow embedded in this process? And do we need to look at the pros and cons of alteration for those? I understand there's the law of unintended consequences. If you start tinkering with your public works standards, then everybody else who's building a project can build to those standards as well. But I'm wondering about the public works standards and if there's work there that needs to be done in terms of alterations for council to consider in order to actually build the project that we're looking for from a safety perspective.
I can chime in on that.
Okay.
As the standards are today, we have a deviation process.
Mm-hmm.
That deviation process has criteria that
I read them today.
assessed for that. Mm-hmm. That includes safety, that includes environmental. You know, is it the best engineering judgment? And if you can prove that, you know, in obviously a common sense sort of way and something where you feel good about, you meet the requirements of the public works standards. Whether it be, you know, we start off with a 3-lane, in Sahalli we start off with a 5-lane. We also know that we don't want to build that. We can't. There's some areas that it would be just for us, it'll be too much impact, negative impact to the city. But we do know that we need those pedestrian improvements. We do know that there's safety improvements, there's medians, turn lanes, separate the traffic, try to avoid the head-on collisions, separate out the pedestrians and bicycles and get them away from the traffic. Those are all improvements that are very important to us, and that's the main premise of the Public Works Standards. And then is also why the deviation process is written as it is, because it allows us to take consideration into the safety and also environment. There's the slide that was mentioned earlier in Sahalli. That's an area that we will have to analyze at some point for structural stability and also groundwater issues, which caused it back in 1982. But there's also trees or slopes. Those are all things we have to look at. So yes, currently the standards can address it. We can follow them and emphasize in the safety aspects of this project.
Okay, so that was one question. I want to understand the results and options before council if we remove a concurrency failure from our TIP.
You mean a project to fix a concurrency?
Yes, I mean, if we remove TRO 5, items 5 and 6 on our currently adopted transportation improvement plan, what are the options before council?
Do you mean to stay in compliance with the GMA?
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have your slides up, but there are several options that we've discussed over time. One is to change your level of service. One is to change your concurrency model. Another is to remove the road or intersections from concurrency. And the fourth is change your land use to reduce your travel demand.
Okay, I'm going to just go out on a ledge and say none of those are something that sound terribly palatable. Simply removing it from concurrency removes 2/3 of the ingress-egress points from the north end of the plateau off, and I think that is a mistake. So I'm troubled by the options if we take it off. But I do want to point to a couple of things for council to at least consider and digest, and I've mentioned them before. First is that Sahalli 202 study that we're going to look at. And the reason that I wanted that added to the tip in the first place was to understand the mechanics of everyone professes the problem is not Sahalli, the problem is down there. Well, then I want to look at the problem down there and find out if you change what you have down there and it's not a traffic light anymore, it's a roundabout or it's a flyover, whatever it is, what happens further upstream on Sahalli? Because at the council's discretion, the level of service at intersection is embedded in our comp plan, and we can't get at it, but we can get at the V over C. And I am not interested in numbers on paper, and I would bet to say nobody that drives on Sahalli or any other road in Sammamish cares about what the V over C number is. They don't care about the math behind. All they know is what they know when they're in their car driving. And if we can get better throughput by fixing something down at 202, and we're studying it, we adopted it on the tip to study that next year, that gives us the flexibility to make changes if we need to, if we understand that we have the mechanics to change the upstream effect on Sahalli. So I think keeping the project on is probably advisable, considering that the alternatives are at least not palatable to me personally. But I think if we can better understand if we turn a dial here, what happens up here, that kind of data is important to council. And then I know we're considering an amendment here, so I won't get into the long term, but I do think the long term is a very important element of this. And I think that's why everybody on the council knows that this isn't really a palatable project, because it doesn't look out, which is why I think in the stream when we had the moratorium on and we were doing this work, we were desperately trying to get to those 2035 numbers and couldn't go there because it wasn't a part of the emergency ordinance. And so we couldn't get that longer term look and adopt them into the comp plan, right? We changed the level of service in there, but we couldn't change the 2035 numbers. So at any rate, let me make sure I got all my questions here as I feverishly scribbled here. Okay, I think I've kind of said my piece, but I don't know that I can support pulling this off. Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
So, Mayor, I'm glad to hear you kind of coming around to the idea that the V over C that we've adopted does not reflect the conditions on the ground. That the V over C that we have, by implementing the projects that will make the V over C calculation pass, will not improve anyone's commute. It will not get anyone down the hill faster. You know, I'm concerned that we would spend all of this money and that, you know, it's not going to move anybody any faster. Hold on one second, let me get to my notes here. I'm concerned that we're going to spend this and that it's going to fail in 2035, right? We're going to pass it for the next 5 or 6 years. It's going to fail in 2035. We're going to have to redo the road. We're going to have to spend more money in the long term. I'm concerned that we're sending the wrong message to the community that we're going to spend all of this money and that they think that we're going to fix the congestion, but we're not going to do that at all. We really have talked about this many times. We're not going to build our way out of this, that the real issue is a regional issue, and that we have to look at this more holistically, and that what we have put in place in terms of this V over C model and this project, people are still going to be sitting in traffic. And I say all of this, and I just want to point out that those are your words, Mayor Malchow, from January 3rd, 2017. All of those are quotes from you, and I completely agree with you. And so for that reason, I want to propose another amendment. I move that we not only remove the project. Oh, we can't have a second amendment?
There you go.
Oh, hold on. Mr. Kenyon's thinking.
You can amend the amendment. I'm
Great.
sorry, you're right.
That in so removing the project after a public hearing, that we also amend the V over C for that section of Sahalli so that it reflects the conditions on the ground, so that when we make real changes to the road that will really improve people's commutes and the travel time, that the V over C calculation reflects that. So that's my proposed amendment.
Your amendment is to amend the V over C.
With the removal of the project from the TIP, right? So Councilmember Hornish proposed that we remove these two projects from the TIP because they are not reflective of what we actually want to do. So I propose that in so doing that we also amend the V over C for that section of Sahalli.
And have a public hearing.
During the public hearing.
What is it?
Okay, hold on. We've got to go by lights.
I have a point of order.
State your point.
I'm not sure that that is within the parliamentary procedure in terms of not questioning, intent or the actual motion itself or the direction of the motion, but
Councilmember Richard, sorry, I'm confused. You said point of order.
Yeah.
Is she out of order?
Yes, I believe the motion's out of order, not her.
Okay. Well,
thank you.
So if you'll let me finish,
Yes,
I'm trying to
please.
clarify. I think the intent of the motion aside, can we, I've asked, defer to the city attorney, if the intent of the motion is to amend the motion has been amended by Councilmember Hornish. That hasn't been voted on yet.
Correct.
And now there's another motion that is contingent upon that motion that hasn't been voted on yet.
I'm just throwing out another amendment.
her amendment encompasses
think that's the
Councilmember
piggyback.
Hornish's amendment,
layers
if I
on top.
understand.
Yeah, I think it piggybacks.
And then we'll vote on them in reverse order is how I understand it.
Councilmember Hornish's amendment will be a moot point because it is embedded in your amendment, if I understand your amendment correctly.
Sure.
Because your amendment is to remove the project from the TIP.
Well,
plus revisit the V over C, amend the V over C. That's what I heard. Is that correct?
I think, so Jason, I think what Jason's trying to say is that I can't make it contingent. So my motion would be then that we amend the V over C calculation for that section of Sahalli to be reflective of the actual conditions on the ground.
What is
As a separate motion?
as a separate amendment?
okay? So not with the removal of the project.
Right. Right. So now we're back to my original. So you're not, your motion doesn't technically amend Councilmember Hornish's amendment.
But that's what it has to do. It has to amend it. Yeah. So it would amend it that if we, So that's your point, is that if we remove the project, that we then also have to amend or modify the V over C calculation?
Well, doesn't look to me like anybody's really clear here. So my recommendation is to go back to Councilmember Hornish's amendment first, vote on that, and then take up your amendment, Councilmember Stewart, because they really don't. Your motion does not really seem to amend Councilmember Hornish's.
But I feel like they go hand in hand, because we can't remove his project, to the mayor's point.
And that's the other point I want to make. Councilmember Hornish's motion, best said, is to schedule the public hearing required by RSW 3577010, and then you will consider at that point whether or not to remove the project. You can't adopt a motion tonight directing the council how to vote after the public hearing.
But if I understood correctly, if I may, that we really can't do that in isolation, that if we want to remove that project because that project is correcting a failure, a concurrency failure, that other action would have to be taken along with that, either adding another project or something, right? That we can't just remove that from the tip.
That's what
that would happen at the public hearing.
That's what the public hearing vote will be. And if that removal were to occur after the public hearing, I would suggest that would be an opportune time for the motion you're proposing tonight.
I see.
That would cure the problem that I think everybody recognizes would exist.
I see. Okay, well then I will withdraw my amendment.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Still be in the queue.
In a similar vein, as we had talked about the V over C, we need to be able to have a realistic conditions on the ground. You, Mayor Malchow, had said is that the citizens, all they know is when they are driving. However, in this methodology that we currently have under this road not only provides only 32 cars per hour, but we've been told repeatedly that there will be no noticeable difference to the consumers, absolutely no noticeable difference to the commuters. So given that, I think that this gives us the time to put a real project together that makes some difference on that road to the people that are there, that addresses the safety issues. Thank you.
Councilmember Hornish.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay. So again, we're voting on the amendment, which is for a public hearing for removal of Sahalli from the tip. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Well, I thought we were going to do a call to question vote first, but okay.
Oh, there's no more lights. We're voting.
That motion. All right. Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Okay. The motion fails with 6 voting against and 1 for. So now we're back to the main motion. So we can go back to questions on the main motion or not.
Put me in the queue.
I have a lot of questions.
I'd like to second. I heard a call to question. Whoever
Okay,
had.
so we need to vote.
I will second the call to question.
Amen. Okay, we need to vote. So we're voting on whether or not the question is going to be called.
Okay.
So all those in favor of calling the question, say aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Okay. The question's been called. The motion failed. 6-1, I think.
The motion, the question motion.
That's right. That's what I'm. No. Okay. Then we need to do it again. Call the question.
This is just on
all
the
I'm
call
hearing.
to question.
Yes, this is just on whether or not we're voting
6 people just voted for it.
to call the question. That's right. That's right. So, sorry. My motion. Sorry, my motion failed.
That's what I'm like,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So I will not get to ask my questions. We are going to move forward. Okay. Let's get it together here because we're dragging this one on. It's now 9 o'clock. Okay.
Repeat it?
So yes. Well, I'm going to try to repeat it here. So the motion on the floor is in 5 parts. The first part was the intersections on Sahalli. And Karen, you may have to help me out with this because I was writing fast. So look at the intersections on Sahalli meeting the level of service in 2035. The second part was to connect the intersections with necessary street segments to show that they work. The third part was to get recommendations for non-motorized between each intersection. The fourth part was to run a V over C test as long as with the intersections at level service D and E in 2035. And the fifth part was to work with an engineering company with an on-call contract, or to look at updating from Petite on their existing 2015. Yes. Did it?
But there was also the numbers showing the intersections in Sahalis.
Mike. Yes. Thank you.
What date did you want that done by? There was a September date?
Your motion.
September 3rd. September 3rd?
8 to 6 weeks.
I think we said September 3rd, our next scheduled meeting.
That might not be long enough.
Okay.
We cannot do that.
September, our
At
second
the
meeting in
earliest date
September.
possible to have it brought back.
Yeah, we could do that, and then we could bring it back.
Here's one of my questions.
Talk to you about, I'm just going to speak loud so that microphones pick me up.
Earliest date possible.
We can look at where we are, and if we need, we can come back to the council and ask for more time. We are not done with it yet, so if you want to say ASAP rather than 6 to 8 weeks, that would give more time to get together, we can give the council where we are.
We have a,
Fair, is that fair?
we have a meeting on 9/17, so can we get an update on that, with an update on 9/17 with, as soon as possible?
Yeah, that's a good idea. You got to say ASAP or ASAP.
Is that?
Is that fair? Is Deputy Mayor Moran's motion?
To show the intersections, so all of these were showing the intersections, not only, what they're going to be 6 years from now, but then what they're going to be in 2035.
Right. I think we got that. Okay. All right. So everyone clear on what we're voting on here?
Can you give me a second? Just to think, just to make sure that I've got all of that. Yeah, do you mind? Come on, Christy, you're getting good at it.
The first part was
pretty
For the
long one.
menu, for the minutes, I mean, that's important for it to happen.
So to direct the city manager and staff to show the possible improvements, LOS, at intersections on Sahalis at present and the impact by 2035, to show the necessary improvements using a model to street segments to ensure they work to 2035, include non-motorized options between intersections for safety improvements up until Northeast 37th Way, and analysis of the V over C test ratio of the LOS, D and E by 2035. Include, working with an engineering firm with which the city has a current contract or other for results by the date of September 17th.
ASAP.
Oh, ASP?
Oh, an update.
An update on September.
Oh, okay.
So, Lita, I think that for clarification on the very last bullet point, and we've got some sidebar conversations if we can.
Okay.
It gets challenging. Let's stop with the sidebar conversations, please. Thank you. Councilmember Valderrama, please. Thank you. The last part was relative to Petite.
Yes.
It was specific to Deputy Mayor Moran's. So when the city of Sammamish has an on-call contract with, or Petite, if we can update their contract.
So, based on their 2015 study.
Yes. Based on the 2015 study.
An update.
With the results,
With an update?
ASAP.
Okay.
Results ASAP with an update to council September 8th.
Okay.
We'll just make sure that's right.
Okay.
So are we okay to vote, Lita?
Yep.
Okay.
Read you the last part and make sure we're good.
Okay.
So just read the last part from the contract and then this part.
So working with an engineering firm with which the city has a current contract or Petite for results as soon as possible with an update to council by September 17th. That's what I have.
If it works for staff.
It did. She said Petite, yeah.
Okay.
So on the 17th, you guys go to the 17th update?
Was it in there to use the 2015 study? That was.
No, she did not read that as part of
See that?
the last part of the motion. I think staff understands, though.
Yeah, I think
so. They got it.
You're going to pass that study out. So when you pass it all out, give us all a copy.
Okay. All right. All those in favor on the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay, by a vote of 5-2, we will study all of this stuff and hear back from staff. Okay. Before everyone folds their laptops, we're not done. We can take a break, though, or we can just plow through with the council reports.
Is there an executive session or no?
No.
No?
Is there an
No.
executive?
No.
Well, let's get through it and go.
Okay. Councilmember Valderrama.
No report for the sake of expediency.
Okay, Councilmember Stewart.
I just want to, Chief Clark came and spoke about the work going on. So I think it'll be interesting to get an update in September, but the governance model for the agreement, I think, is something that we're all going to need to schedule a lot of time to dive into, because it is effectively going to have to relook at the entire agreement there. So that's going to be an important one. I also wanted to ask, Mayor, when you get to your report, can we take votes? It sounds like at the upcoming PIC meeting, there are going to be some votes taken, and I think it's important that we, as a council, agree on what the direction is going to be on those votes.
Yep. Well, I'll get to it. That's why it's in the report. Okay. Councilmember Ross.
Nothing at this time, thank you.
Okay. So on my report, which you have in front of you, I won't regurgitate all of the stuff that's on there. However, we did talk about, and I'm looking at it really quick as I refresh my memory, the PIC won't take action until the PIC packet comes out for the next meeting. But yes, there is the potential of taking action at the PIC meeting in September. So my question for you now and for staff is, if there is feedback, that would be helpful. A PIC will not meet in August. So we are off in August. But if there is action, if there's action in September relative to Vision 2050, and we want to be able to provide any input there relative to either PIC, or if staff has some input that they have relative to it, now would be the time to start collecting those. And I gave you kind of details as to what specifically was discussed there relative to Vision 2050. So,
is that the only action that will potentially be taken by PIC? I thought there was another one.
There may be. The item that I do want to bring to council's attention, and I am going to make a motion relative to this, and that's relative to House Bill 1406, which was the state sales tax credit for affordable housing. The motion I'd like to make is to recommend that we pass a resolution relative to the state sales tax credit for affordable housing. If we do not, our portion of that will go to the county, and we won't get to do anything with it. By passing a resolution, it keeps our options open to us, and just the preservation of options would be helpful. So,
Christy, what we're actually doing is directing them to bring a resolution to us? Okay, good.
It's already in the process, and it's coming.
Thanks.
great. So do we need to take formal action then, if you're already working on it?
Not necessarily, because
Okay, Mike's down
it's a
there
council
shaking
report,
his
and so
head.
I have issues with doing something on reports rather than having it be an agenda item. But just so to answer the question, we've already had a meeting on it, and we're bringing a resolution ASAP to the council. It'll probably be September. One of the meetings is September 1st of October, which is plenty of time before we need to do it. We're bringing it.
Thank you.
Excellent. There,
17th. It's on for the 17th.
perfect.
Thank you, Lita.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
I have got a huge report, but it was supposed to go in last week's packet, but I missed the link. So it's going to come out, everybody can read it there. But in there, please pay attention to
Mike.
Sorry. In there, read the EF&R stuff. There was a handout that we got from Chief Clark that had a really good explanation of the different governance and the different governance models and what each, the pluses and minuses of each. So really take a look at that, because I thought it was extremely helpful. So I will make sure that that's in the packet, and just take a look at that, because that will be coming toward us again in September.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. We had last Friday a meeting at City Hall with the mayor, city manager Rick Rudimenkin, Stephen Chen, Andrew Zagers, and was it, I believe, Cheryl Paston was there, at any rate, to discuss Klahani and the pending closure or construction on the Issaquah Falls City Road and how that will affect the neighborhood of Klahani with the traffic diversions that are going on. There was some clarity about timing. There was some clarity about signage for businesses to maintain good business frequency or patronage at the Klahani Plaza businesses, and it's the importance of making sure that essentially those folks that are going to be utilizing that road, specifically at the closure, recognize the neighborhood aspect of Klahani, and that they utilize the detour onto Beaver Lake / 32nd. And I think myself, Fred Nystrom, the HOA director at Klahani, got good information that the folks at the city are going to be managing and monitoring and essentially coming up with options should traffic in Klahani increase to significant levels that we need to be aware of. So it was definitely a good meeting, and I appreciate Fred Nystrom and the city staff coming together and helping us better understand that pending project. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I have 2 items to add to my report, which I will read right now. This has to do, and thank you, Mayor, for bringing it to our attention. This has to do with the Falls City Metropolitan Park District de-annexation. So this morning, staff provided council with information about the process for withdrawing a small piece of Sammamish from the Falls City Park District. Once, and this is staff, once we've fully researched the details of House Bill 2044, staff will contact the affected HOAs to ensure they are aware of their options. We will continue to keep council informed of any progress. Okay, so that's for you.
Thank you.
And one extra one is the 2020 docket requests statement. Through the adoption of updated procedures earlier this year for amending the Sammamish Comprehensive Plan and Development Codes, the city now accepts docket requests throughout the entire year. However, docket requests received by the end of business on August 5th of this year will be considered by the Planning Commission and City Council later this year for approval. Any requests docketed or approved by City Council will be scheduled for legislative review in 2020. Questions and inquiries can be directed to Miriam Leitner, our Senior Management Analyst with the Community Development Department. Thank you, Mayor. And on mine, we are still in the recruitment for a HR director and deputy city manager. I did attend the city manager administrator's July meeting. We discussed a number of things. The cross-laminated timber construction was very interesting, and they use it a lot in Europe, and it's gaining ground here. The Veteran Senior and Human Services Levy, Metro Transit's current initiatives, and with those initiatives, how they're going to fund those initiatives, and then SCA update, and then we had a roundtable discussion basically talking about what the councils are going to look like in the future for those cities that were represented. So that was it was a good discussion. And then I went on a public works tour and seeing all the great projects we have going on in our city. And again, it was a great meeting in discussing the Klahani IFC traffic concerns, and I think it was extremely productive. We got some things ironed out, and I think we'll be ready to go when construction starts on Falls City. And with that, Mayor, thank you.
Thank you.
I move to adjourn.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay,
good summer.
seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, by a vote of 7-0, we're adjourned.